Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 110 of ThROH The Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. I'm Trevor Dane, joined as always by the co-host, Matt Feuerstein. Matt, we are back. We are at 110, which seems significantly bigger than 109 for some reason.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you said 110, I was like, that's almost crazier to me than 100. It's like, okay, we did 100 episodes, and now we've, done suddenly 10 more? That's a lot.
Who knows what other numbers will have surprising emotional impacts on us, but I don't know how to make a transition. Sometimes I think, I should try and transition this into something else, and then I realize there's times that are not appropriate for wacky transitions, and this is one because, Matt, I do think there's one thing we should talk about a little bit before we get to tonight's show, which will be the usual blend of fun and games, and there'll definitely be chances to win prizes and trivia. Okay, not really,
say,
but
games. That's I've never been more excited.
But the wrestling world lost someone since our last episode, and that would be Dean Rasmussen, who some of you will know pretty well. Some of you, maybe our younger listeners, won't know at all. But I was thinking about this analogy before I listened to a podcast, which I'll plug in a second, that another Death Alley Driver writer, Phil Schneider, mentioned the same analogy, so I thought, God damn it, he beat me to it. But Dean Rasmussen is a guy I would say who is like the Velvet Underground, that band from the 60s, where people have often said about the Velvet Underground, yeah, a lot of their shows at the time might have been sparsely attended, but everyone at those shows formed their own band. A lot of those bands became bands you knew. I would say even if you don't know Dean Rasmussen's work, and if you don't know the Death Alley Driver video review, his kind of web wrestling review magazine, which became a whole culture about 20 years ago, more than 20 years by now, started in the late 90s. You definitely know people that were influenced by it and were there, be it Tony Khan was famously a poster, a young Tony Khan. I know Samoa Joe came out this week with a condolence and was a song that was posted there. A lot of wrestlers that probably tried to keep it secret were posting and reading there and were influenced by it. Phil Schneider on this podcast, I'll get to in a second, he mentioned that Rob Feinstein used to post stuff in the middle of the night there and that they'd have to delete and take down because it was unsavory. So it was a who's who of things. And I will go on to say, personally, I don't know if I would be doing ThROH The Years without. I don't want to. I'm not going to try and build this up too big just because this is a tragic event. But I will say, I think like a lot of wrestling fans, you start out as a fan of one federation or one kind of scene, and then you either kind of stick to that for your whole life, which is perfectly fine, or you kind of reach a point where you kind of awaken to other things and you kind of transition to being more of just a wrestling fan that kind of hops from different things. And for me, a big part of me going from a WWF, WCW fan in the late 90s to just being a wrestling fan was the Death Alley Driver video review. Dean Rasmussen, that was the first place that really opened my eyes in a lot of ways to that there was wrestling all over the world and that there was independent wrestling in the U.S. that could be great. And the great thing about Dean was he was so positive and so enthusiastic. He just wanted to turn people on to the things he loved. And if you ever read those, you'd have to go to the archive, the web archive, because they're not really up on the site now. But if you go to deathallydriver.com on the web archive, the Wayback Machine, you can find all the old issues if you search back far enough. And the reviews there would be Joshi, Japanese women's wrestling, right next to a review of hardcore wrestling, next to a lucha review, next to a review of a WCWC show, Worldwide, next to a review of Jersey All Pro, pre Ring of Honor, low key Danielson raves. And that place is, I wasn't an active poster on the message board. I was too intimidated. I was too young. I was I don't know enough to talk to these people. But that's where I learned about Japanese wrestling. That's where I learned about I should pay attention to guys like Low Key and Bryan Danielson back when he was American Dragon. And I know I'm far from the only one. It's just a highly influential thing. Matt, before I know I've been drawing on before I pass it to you, Matt, I'll just say Between the Sheets, another wrestling podcast, Dave Bixenspan and Chris Zellner, they did 2 podcasts this week in tribute to him. They did a half an hour little show with their personal thoughts of Dean. And then they had the 2 Phils from Death Alley Driver, Phil Ripa and Phil Schneider. And they talked for about 2 hours. I listened to them both. If you're into learning about Dean or just there's some fun stories, particularly in the 2-hour one. And something Phil even mentioned was he was like, he was trying not to be egotistical about it, but he was like, he's talked to Tony Khan, in the past. He knows the people that read Death by Dragon. And he was like, AEW might not quite be in its form or exist without the influence. Ring of Honor, he mentioned, these guys were hyping up a lot of the guys that became stars in Ring of Honor before Ring of Honor even started. So it's a big loss, and condolences to his friends and family.
Yeah, I listened to that Between the Sheets episode too, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a very good tribute, and I don't have much to add other than what you said. I echo everything you said, and rest in peace, Dean.
Yeah. So now we can get on to the usual show. We've got a few pieces of news happening in the Ring of Honor timeline between the last show and this show. First one's from the Wrestling Observer, and this isn't really related to Ring of Honor, but I just thought it's interesting to kind of sometimes remind, just since we're so tunnel visioned on this show about Ring of Honor, because it's a Ring of Honor podcast, it's fun to kind of remember things that are kind of going on in wrestling at the same time. So this is the Wrestling Observer's report. Dave Meltzer writes, CM Punk debuted in ECW, beating Just Incredible in 4 minutes 11 seconds with the Anaconda Vice. Punk got a big reaction, including ROH chants. Taz tried to get Punk over on commentary as having studied Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and being a heavily disciplined athlete. There was an overrated chant directed at Punk, but most of the reaction was strong. The crowd made him because this wouldn't have played nearly as well as if it was held on a SmackDown show. I don't think it's a coincidence they debuted him in front of a crowd where you knew he'd be over. And so, yeah, we are officially, out of the CM Punk in WWE's developmental at the time era, and now at the point where like CM Punk is, he's not the first Ring of Honor guy to jump to WWE and be on TV. That'd be guys like Paul London, Brian Kendrick, but I do think Punk's success over time, it is a sign that starts giving WWE another reason to look even closer and pilfer more from the indies.
I cannot tell you how excited I was when CM Punk first popped up on the ECW TV. I was waiting and wondering what would become of him after his OVW run. And obviously Paul Heyman getting to book a TV show really helped. I remember just being amazed that he got to be CM Punk. That just wasn't a given at all at the time. And, you definitely saw the simplification of his character, the way they kind of just has promos at the beginning were a lot of buzzwords, and catchphrases, my addiction is competition and, really highlighted the straight edge thing. He didn't really get to be his full self for a while, I would say, but it was cool that he was CM Punk. It was cool that he was getting a push. I was marking out, bro.
Yeah, this was a cool time, for that kind of stuff. And going to the Observer, there's another thing I saw, which I thought was interesting, just how ahead of time people knew about this, how Gabe Sapolsky, of course, the booker of Ring of Honor, was putting word out of this because he must have directly told Dave this. Dave wrote in the Observer, Gabe Sapolsky is super high on Takeshi Morishima as the next big foreign superstar and wants to feature him in Ring of Honor in 2007. Currently, Morishima doesn't have a working visa for the U.S., but Pro Wrestling Noah will probably get him one for next year. The idea is to build toward a Joe versus Morishima match probably in the latter stages of 2007, although anything like that is very much tentative. So, yeah, obviously that happens in the first half of 2007, probably because Joe is on his way out. He won't be around in the latter half of 2007 in Ring of Honor. But it's funny, you see that story, and I imagine at the time, if I don't remember what I felt like, I thought, that'll be neat. But I don't think anyone reading at the time could possibly have, really comprehended, how big Gabe's plans for. And, now looking back, reading this, doing this retrospective podcast, it's like a giant big neon light where he's basically saying, I'm in love with this guy. I'm going to push this guy to the moon. Yeah, I mean,
it's I think hindsight is 20/20 on a lot of these things, but I don't know. Do you think it should have been pretty obvious then too?
Maybe. It's funny because Morishima did not have, quite the buzz among U.S. fans, I would think, as a guy like Kenta, so that might have tempered it.
I gotta say, I did definitely start hearing a lot about him at this point. And
Yeah.
so the buzz was there. And I don't remember where it was, if it was more on like Death Valley Driver Board and places like that, or if it was more like Meltzer himself. But I heard his name a lot about a guy who was like a can't miss superstar. Even by this point.
Yeah. It's going to be fun to track his stuff in 2022 when we get to that stuff. So
I think actually, thinking back, I think it actually was Meltzer who would talk about it a lot and compare him to like Terry Gordy and stuff like that.
Yeah, and definitely even just his body type and look, his hair, he definitely at this point already you're starting to hear a lot of Japanese Terry Gordy. And also, Matt, did you notice I tried to come up with to make fun of like our podcast pace. I was trying to come up with a year in the far flung future when we'd get to the Morishima era. And I said 2022, which was last year. So, my comprehension of time not working very well, but Matt, one more tidbit. This is not news that happened between now and then, but I did not know where else to place it. So, doing research for this episode, I glossed over a bunch of Necro Butcher podcasts. He's a guy who's done a lot of stuff. Didn't find too much directly about tonight's match, but since it's such a big match in his and BJ Whitmer's career, I looked over and I finally broke down, Matt. I bought the official MP4 of the BJ Whitmer 2012 Smart Mark video shoot interview. I have not watched it all yet, but I've watched a significant chunk of it. And one of my least favorite things, Matt, is when I discover a wrestling shoot interview and it's full of stories that I would have done great to insert into past episodes of Through the Years when they're at the appropriate times, and that moment is gone. So depending if there's enough stuff, I might, maybe have a section on one show if there's anything really interesting. But there was a few things I kind of wanted to, but I'm just going to stick to one thing right now that's stood out because I did think this is kind of a fairly significant thing. And then we'll get to when we covered tonight's main event, a lot of the things he talked about in that shoot directly about this match, but something we missed at the time. BJ, so everyone knows if you've been watching the show or the Ring of Honor shows with us, Arena Warfare, the end angle of that was the huge angle of BJ Whitmer getting beat on in the ring at ECW Arena by basically half the CZW roster. That was not the original end of that show, Matt. The original idea, according to BJ Whitmer, was, John Zandig was going to set the Ring of Honor logo in the middle of the ring, the canvas, on fire and powerbomb BJ Whitmer onto it. And BJ Whitmer's like, that probably would have sucked, but I was up for it. But then apparently like fire code stuff, they scrapped that. And so this was
the idea that when back in that era when CZW was running that building a lot, that there would ever be a problem with fire code stuff, given the amount of things they did with fire. Is surprising to me. I mean, I believe it, but it's surprising.
But it really does continue this theme of BJ Whitmer. They just put him through hell. They're like, hey, BJ, can we set the ring on fire and powerbomb you on? And if you watch the shoot interview, a lot of BJ Whitmer's reactions to stuff like this seems to be equal parts enthusiasm, but also some of this is gonna suck.
Yeah, I mean, listen. I mean, if you were to just watch the era, which is what I've been doing is, and did back then, it did seem like BJ was just up for it. He was just game for anything. But yeah, I'm sure deep down there was some hesitation inside his brain. I don't know.
We'll touch on that a little bit at the main event, and I guess we should. If we want to get to the main event, Matt, we should start covering the show. Again, the show we're covering tonight, of course, is War of the Wire 2. Took place July 28th, 2006 at the Montgomery County Fairgrounds Coliseum in Dayton, Ohio, in front of a reported crowd of 600 fans. Chris Johnson, a reader of the Pro Wrestling Torch, he sent in a live report at the time, and he noted he wrote, Ring of Honor drew its largest crowd in Dayton, estimated at around 600, since Redemption in 2005. So that's pretty impressive when you consider that Redemption was billed as, this is the last weekend we meet at this time for CM Punk, that big 4-way world title match that ended up where the belt changed hands.
Although if you think closely, I am pretty sure there was only 2 shows between Redemption and this one in Dayton.
Okay, not as impressive.
And neither of them were big shows. That was the Tag Wars 06, and the other one was Weekend of Champions Night 1, which was the lesser of those 2 shows. So this show was by far the best card they had in Dayton since the year before. So,
yeah, definitely.
With the context, I think it makes a lot more sense.
And we also got something we should mention that you, the home viewer, the home listener as well, should keep in mind watching the show, I think, because, again, this will be something else referenced in the main event, but something you'll notice if you really pay attention to the way the skin of certain talent glistens. But through the years, listener Ronnie Lafoyette, I pardon you if I just murdered your name, he sent an email, and of course, through the years at gmail.com, THROH for through. We love when you send emails. He gave a note, and one thing he wrote in the note that I want to mention here is this is him quoted verbatim. He said, "It was hot in that building. Not just hot, but fucking hot!" 3 exclamation marks. That building has exhaust fans in the ceiling to help move air and dissipate heat. Those were not turned on until almost everyone had left the building. The air temperature inside that building was at least 90 or 95 degrees. This BJ Whitmer shoe interview, BJ Whitmer, that was one of his memories of this night. He said it was probably close to 100 outside the building. He estimated 100 to 110 in the building.
On commentary, Dave Prazak referenced the fact that the wrestlers referred to it as the oven.
Yeah, so, I mean, Matt, it wouldn't be summer U.S. independent wrestling if companies did not run in buildings in the scorching heat that did not have proper ventilation or air conditioning.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, that's bad. Like, I obviously, like, I'm not defending it. I think that shouldn't be, right? It's dangerous. But there is something to, like, when you watch, like, a summer show, I don't know, maybe it's just the kid in me, but there's something about the atmosphere in the summer where everything just feels, like, no pun intended, hotter. And this was a really hot crowd. And just there's like a, I don't know, there's like a certain excitement that you get with these like big summer shows. And I still feel that way when I watch certain like wrestling events in the summertime. I don't know. It might just be all in my brain, but I don't know. This was a really hot crowd. This was the hottest crowd they had in Dayton in a long time.
No, and I agree. I get that feeling. I don't even know if it's even like just residual summer vacation from our childhood. It's even like just everything in the summer seems a little more fun, even if it's the exact same thing you could have done 4 months earlier. And I've talked about this before, and I want to make clear. I think buildings should be comfortable. They should be, amenable to the fans. Fans should not have to suffer through anything just to see a good show or as a badge of honor.
Nor should workers.
But I mentioned this before. I do think sometimes if it's a good show, there is, be it like a wrestling show or a rock concert or something, there is a little bit of a charm and a thrill I get sometimes of like, I'm watching a great show and I'm kind of suffering a little, and this is kind of a shithole. No offense to the Montgomery County Arm. I'm sure it's great. But sometimes I get I don't know if you agree, I get a little juice out of that even. Like,
I think it depends on how uncomfortable I am. But I think if you listen to the Joe Kobashi show, that we did, for several reasons, my back was really, really killing me during that show. And I think it did sort of enhance my memory and experience of it in some ways. Like, I am suffering for this amazing moment. I guess I can relate to what you're saying.
It makes you feel like you actually like earned somehow, even though you just did like the most passive entertainment experience possible. Like, no, I suffered to see Joe versus Kobashi, and that gives you like, makes you feel like a little more, I don't know, it gives you a little boost, I think.
Yeah. But thinking about that whole summer thing, like I was just thinking back while we were talking, like I think it goes all the way back to like being excited for some of those summer slams back in the early 90s, and then like the summer of 1997, WWF Raw, where with the shows in Canada and Bret Hart and all that. It's just like the electric atmosphere, Canadian Stampede. And then like the Highway to Hell music videos with The Undertaker and Steve Austin and Goldberg and the Georgia Dome. And then all the way to Cage of Death in the summer of 2006. And, just like, and then CM Punk coming back to AEW. It's just like, there's something about the summer. I don't think it's just my nostalgia for the summers of youth. I think there is something about the summer that brings the positive and exciting vibes. I don't know.
The Through the Years official position on summer. Pretty neat.
Yeah, we like it.
So one other note Chris Johnson had from his PW Torch live report, which I'm glad, because a lot of times Cage Match does not catch all the dark matches. And this was one, it's not a special one, but I did think his note was a little bit interesting. Chris Johnson wrote that there was a pre-show match for the show. It was Bobby Dempsey, Mystico Fantastico, and Rhett Titus defeated CK3, Shane Hagedorn, and, quote, another wrestler he did not know the name of. He wrote, "This was the best pre-show match I have ever seen on a Ring of Honor card. CK3 is a real good talent, and I hope he gets more chances." That last line kind of sad because I looked it up on Cage Match. He gets one more dark match a few months from now, and then he's done in Ring of Honor forever. So he will not get more chances. But I don't know how many shows Chris Johnson saw, but it's interesting that he went out of his way to say, like, this is the best pre-show match I've ever seen in Ring of Honor. So we move on to the show proper, though. We open up with a shot of the Ring of Honor students setting up the ring before the show as a slightly ominous guitar riff plays. Get ready to hear that guitar riff multiple times tonight.
I'd say it's more than slightly ominous.
BJ Whitmer dragging his luggage behind him in a little wheelie case. He walks to the ring, jumps in it. He surveys all that he sees. He's very serious. A couple members, Ring of Honor students with gloves, then carry an entire bale of barbed wire to him. They just put in the ring, and BJ just drops to his knees and stares at it, and that's the entire opening segment. So
almost like he's praying to the barbed wire.
We'll see these segments throughout the show. I would put these under, I appreciate the idea, in execution kind of goofy. But
I will say this: the one thing it does accomplish, it makes BJ Whitmer seem like the star of the show, and that's cool for him.
Yeah. Absolutely. Next, we join Homicide outside the building. He thinks it's ironic that Jim Cornette and Adam Pearce aren't at the double shot this weekend, especially after what they just did, obviously, at the show closing angle at Cage of Death. Homicide says he and Cornette now have a personal issue they're going to have to solve. He calls Adam Pearce Cornette's butt buddy and says he's going to get it too. Homicide says his son was at Cage of Death and he saw Homicide get beaten by them, at the show. And then he strangely feels the need at this point to add in his promo, "I didn't know my son was in the crowd, but he was with my family. And when I got hit with those belt lashes on my back, I saw my son's face." So I wonder if he felt like he just had to mention that part just to be like, I wasn't crazy to bring my son there. I didn't know they were bringing him.
I do think that's probably what it was. It sounds bad for me to bring my son to that show. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny, just the character of Homicide being cognizant of no, I'm not, I'm not a reckless parent, everybody. But, Homicide says he loves spitting in Cornette's face that night as he's hated him for 20 years since the Midnight Express was feuding with the Rock and Roll Express. Homicide's going to get it.
I really enjoyed that because he was yelling the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll. He was just all of a sudden I hated you since then. I appreciated that.
Yeah, Homicide, anyone that's talked about him, big old school wrestling fan who kind of knows his history. So it's great that he, again, that's a very real thing where, he can easily draw upon that history. He's probably a guy who has watched tapes of that extensively. So, Homicide then says, "I'm going to get my match with Steve Corino. I'm going to get my world title shot, and I'm going to make a statement tonight when I pin Bryan Danielson in the four-corner survival match." He then says he's going to do, and this is a quote that Matt and I know we both love this quote. He then says he's going to go to Jim Cornette's home and do, quote, "things that people don't love," unquote. Matt, he's gonna drink most of the orange juice and leave just a dribble in the fridge.
Right. We were trying to come up with different things that people don't love when you're a guest in their house, and it's play music too loud, track mud on the carpet, chew with your mouth open at the dinner table. Or when you instead of just drinking the orange juice, or just you pour the orange juice and then you only you put the cap back on but don't actually turn it. So
I hate that.
Yeah, so that falls off. Or I don't know, some people probably don't like it if you leave the toilet seat up. Maybe you share, you're in the guest bedroom and you play the TV too loud, or you snore really loud. Yeah, he's going to do all those things.
I want this to just keep going. I wanted to see how long you could go. Just do another 15 minutes of annoying things.
Well, listeners, please, feel free and please tag us in your tweets about things that people don't love when you go over their house.
So, Matt, we rarely ever talk about our thoughts on the show, before the show we save it for, unless there's something that really speaks to one of us, we save it for the podcast. But you mentioned to me, I really like that Homicide promo, and I thought it was good, but I was kind of disappointed by it because I feel like Homicide's pretty mad here, but I've seen him angrier in other promos, and I was maybe just my expectations were too high. But after that, like we talked about, the last show ends with maybe the big, most heavy heat, old school, super dour note angle in Ring of Honor history, and Homicide completely humiliated and beaten and screwed, and he's not that much angry. I thought he'd be even angrier.
Well, let me just be clear. When I said I love this promo, I thought it was really unintentionally funny. That's all I meant. I don't think it was like a quality follow-up in the sense that yeah, totally. He'd been pissed for 2 months about constantly being screwed by ROH. This was the ultimate screwing, and he's back and he just cuts a fairly calm promo against a rival, and then he just is like, yeah, but you know what? I'm going to wrestle in this 4 corners match. Yeah. And with the stipulation that if you beat Danielson, you get a title shot, but he already was supposed to have a title shot anyway. He's just a guy on the show. I guess it's you can't do a big angle with him every single show because there's just too many shows, and you just have to have him wrestle matches sometimes. So I understand that's what ROH is. But it is awkward to be the immediate follow up. The other thing is that Cornette is not there, so that limits what you can do. But I suppose they could have done something where he sort of acts like CM Punk, where on the show where he's trying to be like, who beat up Lucy, where he's just like a presence and just wreaking havoc because he's so pissed off. That would be one other way to go about it.
No, I completely agree, and that's a great point, which is they're kind of in a bind now. Like when we read that quote from Gabe Sapolsky on the last show where he mentioned, I don't know why, the Cornette Homicide feud kind of petered out after, the Death Before Dishonor 4 and Cage of Death, that hot angle to start. I think one of the reasons is because, unfortunately, the one half of that angle isn't around for a whole bunch of shows. Immediately after you shoot that hot angle, he's not there to directly respond or get into it. And Adam Pearce isn't even, like Homicide mentioned in the promo, at least you could have attacked him or done something with him as a surrogate. He can't even do that on this double shot. So yeah, instead it feels kind of flat, where Homicide's first match in Ring of Honor after this crazy angle is a match where he's not really has a giant beat. I mean, it's to kind of maybe set up a bit more with the Danielson title shot we know is coming, but he doesn't win the match. He doesn't lose the match. It's not really anything that's advancing the Cornette feud. And like we both mentioned, this promo, he's mad, but he's not that mad. It's just kind of a flat continuation of a very major moment.
Yep.
That brings us to the opening match of the main card. Jimmy Jacobs, scored to the ring by Lacey, defeats Trick Davis via pinfall in 6 minutes, 57 seconds after he hit the top rope back senton. Matt, before we throw it to you in the match, something we're both very excited to talk about. So this is a little piece of Ring of Honor history that if you did not live through this, you will not appreciate this. But, Ring of Honor, wrestling companies love cryptic teases. We love getting excited for them. We love when they pay off. We hate when they're disappointing. Ring of Honor had a couple things in their newswire where they would write stuff like ROH, the ROHbot Arm, the ROHbot Arm will debut. The ROHbot Arm is coming. The ROHbot Arm is coming soon. Get ready. The ROHbot Arm will make its debut on the War of the Wire 2 home release. And Matt, the ROHbot Arm, for those who do not know, is a new name graphic when wrestlers make their entrance that basically has a mid-90s WCW Saturday Night-esque
Saturday Night Live, wow.
I was going to say Saturday Night. No, Saturday Night Live never went Terminator. But if you've ever seen the mid-90s WCW Saturday Night thing where it's basically aping the Terminator, it's basically a robot arm like that is pushing forward the nameplate for each wrestler's injury. It's basically a new name graphic. That's it.
Yeah, it's a new chyron for wrestlers' names. I thought this was one of the funniest pranks Gabe has ever done. I really appreciated it. I loved it. This would be it's like the equivalent of Tony Khan has a big announcement. And the big announcement is there's a new way that we have wrestler name graphics. Would they come out? It would be like that. I really loved it.
And the amazing thing is Ring of Honor has had multiple different graphics, chyrons throughout their history. So it's not like, oh, we're changing the classic you've known and loved for years.
Yeah. They change it like a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the one time they're like, let's really like, yeah, this had to have been like, they had to have had a smirk on their face when they wrote these up. It's just hilarious. But Matt, what do you think about this match? Jimmy Jacobs continued. Trick Davis, a guy gets a little bit of spot work in Ring of Honor at this point, a regular in IWA Mid-South. What do you think about this match?
Well, my favorite part actually happens right before the match, which is when they're coming down to the ring, a fan in the front row yells, "Lacey, you are way too good for him." And I remember thinking to myself, like, that's like deja vu. I thought I heard that and maybe on another DVD. And then Jimmy Jacobs literally looks at the fan and says, "You said that on the last DVD too. I got it." and I was like, wow, he really does just say that on every show. Like, that's very funny. So I enjoyed that Jimmy also noticed that. It also tells me that Jimmy Jacobs watches back the DVDs. That's good. I bet you a lot of the wrestlers don't do that.
On the BJ Whitmer shoot review, he talks about like watching. At least he references something on the. He says if you watch the DVD of the show I broke my ankle on, like he points out. So I was like, I had that same thought you just had, which is like, wow, I wonder how many wrestlers actually go back and watch their DVDs.
Well, that match, especially the one where he broke his ankle, that's like, that probably would have been a traumatic match for him to watch back, because that was a match where he and Jimmy both almost died.
Yeah.
But I thought that this was a good opener. Like, as far as things go, it was focused work, fast pace. There was a hot crowd. So when I say really good, like, I don't mean like it's like a really good match, like 3.5 stars or anything, but like just good for an opener in the sense that it was still short. They didn't try to have a great match, but it was fast paced. Trick Davis, he does some of that like arm draggy stuff that you do at the beginning of a match. And then Jimmy Jacobs just blocks one and just repeatedly stomps down on Davis's back, and he kind of works over the back a little bit. You could see that he's being more aggressive here. He's not doing as much like comedy playing to the crowd. He still plays to the crowd, but it's, he's definitely focused and not running out of the ring to, hug Lacey or whatever. He goes for a lot of covers, which, that's Lacey's like, I want you to win the match. I want you to win the match. So it shows that he's following her orders. He does this really cool sort of messy flying headbutt thing with Davis standing up. And it almost seems like if Jacobs was off by a little bit more, he would have gone head first into the mat. Did you notice that spot?
Yeah, and I was trying to think, have we ever seen that before or not? Because I was thinking maybe once, I don't know, but I thought, wow, that's like a crazy spot to do. Basically, he does a flying headbutt to a guy that's standing up, and then he just has his head hit him in the chest.
Yeah. Like, and the angle is such that it's like, that was a really close call. But yeah. At one point, Davis misses a move at the turnbuckle, and Jacobs hits a double stomp to his back. He pulls Davis out of the corner, but Davis pulls Jacobs into his knees, gets a 2 count on that. Jacobs avoids an up and over, catches Davis, hits a Death Valley driver, then gets the send-on bomb for the win, which I thought was cool for him to win with a move other than the Contra Code, too. So there's a lot I liked about this match. I would say, considering it's a short ROH opener, I would say it was definitely above the average for that. I think the hot crowd helped, too. But I just like the focus that Jacobs had. I really think that he's coming into his own in a lot of ways during this era.
Yeah, I completely agree. I thought this was like above average. Like there's a limit you can go for like a 7-minute opener. But the one thing I always say, I think we've seen 1 or 2 other matches like this. It's always weird in this era to see a Jimmy Jacobs in a match where he's like the more push veteran that's kind of dominating the offense and leading the match, because it almost feels a little unnatural to me, because Jimmy Jacobs, because of his stature and sometimes his push, he's almost always, even in matches where he's very competitive with his opponents, he's always like working from underneath and really fighting to earn his comebacks. He's very rarely the front runner. He's like the front runner in this match. And I thought he was very good though at he gives Davis just enough so it doesn't feel like a squash. I think there's always an art to that, but still enough where you feel like, oh no, Jimmy Jacobs is the better wrestler. He was fairly dominant here, but he gives enough to, show off a little bit. And yeah, I love that opening. just the jousting he had with that fan you mentioned before the match even started. And I also thought, like, Jacobs came to this match with no fewer than 4 spots in a 7-minute match that I've never or rarely seen from him in Ring of Honor, which was, you know, the headbutt spot to the chest that you talked about. When he has Trick Davis lying on his stomach on the mat, and he pulls Davis's arms behind him and just rams him like chest first with his arms, almost like a curb stomp without like the stomp over and over again. I thought that was neat. You know, at one point he does his usual running drop kick on the outside where he has his opponent's head. He's lying on the mat. He puts his head right up against the ring post, and Jacobs then goes to the outside, does a running drop kick, you know, drop kicks the guy's head against the ring post, and he does it to Davis, and then he tries to do it later a second time, but Trick Davis moves, and Jacobs crotches himself from like a running start on the ring post on the outside. I thought, wow, that's kind of neat. And then even near the end where Jacobs does that move, it's hard to describe, but everyone's seen it a bunch of times, where Trick Davis is lying in the ring corner on his butt, and he's grabbing onto the ropes with his hands, and Jacobs does the thing where you grab the guy by the feet and you kind of yank him up, you know, in the air, like to drop him back down, a power bomb or something. And instead, in midair, Davis turns it into a code breaker, which was like, you know, pre-Jericho code breaker. I thought, oh man, that's really cool. So overall, you know, a good little opener, and the robot arm and that fan got busted for doing a repeat. So good stuff. But next, we go to Dave Prazak backstage, where he is joined by Colt Cabana and his opponent for tonight, Nigel McGuinness. They go over their last feud, the feud they had, you know, that they're basically reprising for one night tonight. Nigel says tonight, though, is only one and done. This is just one match. We're not starting everything over again. He goes, tomorrow I'm going to go and beat that clubfoot clamdinger Bryan Danielson to unify the Peer and the World titles. Cabana gets annoyed, not that Nigel, you know, is looking past him, but that Nigel used the word unified, calling it, quote, the Queen's English, unquote. So that was too highfalutin, the word unified for Colt Cabana.
That's very funny.
Colt says it's not about who's smarter in the ring, it's about who's the best wrestler in the ring. And then Colt says he's going to win, and he also emphasizes that tonight is one and done. So that's something they really stressed on a previous show, and they're really stressing tonight, like, hey, for whatever reason, they really want to make sure you know, and this is going to be the case, like, this is one rematch, we're not doing the feud again, just tonight. At this point, Gabe says, cut from behind the camera. We get a classic Ring of Honor, the camera's still rolling vignette where Prazak leaves, and then Nigel, you know, who's kind of starting to show signs of being a little more laid-back babyface, he puts his arm around Cole. He's like, who were you in the car with the other night? Which he's referring to a promo that happened on the Ring of Honor video wire where there was wrestlers talking about, oh, Colt's in the, you know, his car, he's in the parking lot, and the car's rocking, he's with some girl, man, and, you know, we don't know who the girl is. So Nigel even says, I hear the car was rocking, and Colt says, she was the dog's bollocks. What a minge on this one. But then Colt plays.
Yeah, now it's funny that Colt doesn't know the word unify, but he does still minge.
Oh, he knows the right or the wrong words, his British words, and he's fine with those. Colt plays coy at this point. He goes, you know, it could have been anyone in the car with me. There's so many, and I don't kiss and tell. So continuing the lazy storyline there. Matt, do you have any thoughts about this other than the use of dogs, bollocks, and minge?
Not exactly. Yeah, there was when Nigel did that, I was like, oh, is he turning face already? And then I watched the match, and I was like, maybe not quite. But I did like, you know, I like that whenever Nigel calls Danielson a clam digger, and this time a clubfoot clam digger. And what I especially made me happy was realizing, oh, I just heard Nigel say that on commentary about Danielson just a few months ago in 2023. It's like, man, things really do come full circle, you know? So it's nice that we're getting all the old hits played again. Including some other old hits that we've been begging for a while, possibly coming up real soon on the new AEW show, which I think they're calling Saturday Night Live.
I want the AEW arm to introduce CM Punk versus Samoa Joe.
Yes.
let's really go all the way. Yeah. But yeah, it's also crazy. We always talk about the way that Ring of Honor timeline syncs up with us. That you know, there's also, who knows if it'll happen, but Nigel McGuinness, who knows if he steps into the ring one more time in the UK. In a few shows, Matt, on Through the Years, we'll be covering Ring of Honor in the UK, which I
have to think that if Nigel does get back into the ring for like to do a real match, Danielson has to be on the list of people he's going to wrestle, you know?
Yeah, I mean, Nigel, all I saw was, people speculating. I think Nigel's done one recent media interview where he basically almost kind of poo-pooed it, where he's like, oh, it'd take a lot of work and stuff, but he was like, oh, if they sell out Wembley, I might have to dust off the boots. And it's like, well, I don't know if they'll sell it out, but they're going to do a giant crowd. Like,
I mean, they already have done a giant crowd, so.
Yeah, so, like, if he's ever going to be tempted to do it again, like, I would say to him, I don't know what his physical status is, but if you were ever in your back pocket thinking maybe in the right setting I could have one more match, I would say this is the time to have, that show, would be the time to have a match if you have one more in you.
If Nigel is going to ever come out of retirement to show his minge to the fans, it's got to be in the UK.
Him missing the show, if he's capable of doing it and could do it safely, would be the dog's bollocks. But, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I don't know. I'm just guessing. Davey, I guess it depends on your. I'm not even going to finish that.
Let's just move right along.
Let's move on to Davey Richards and Jarrell Clark defeated the Embassy of Jimmy Rave and Sal Rinauro, scored to the ring by Daisy Hayes. They win via submission in 15 minutes, 48 seconds, when Davey Richards makes Jimmy Rave tap out to the stretch muffler. During the ring entrance, Rave takes a roll of toilet paper to the head and does one of my favorite things during a Jimmy Rave entrance, which is not when that happens, but when Jimmy Rave decides to bump and sell it, which he doesn't always do. And he does that here. He bumps to the mat, sells it like like the Kennedy assassination. Then later on, when Richards makes his way to the ring, he grabs one of the rolls of toilet paper and he throws it at Daisy Hayes. And then Daisy Hayes has to be like pulled away from Sal Rinauro. And I love this little storyline they've been kind of doing just through their promos and her little work as a manager, where like basically she has no fear of any of these guys and like constantly is always in the promos being like, you should have let me take them out. And I love at this point, Sal Rinauro's having to hold Daisy Hayes back from like attacking Davey Richards, and then Daisy actually slaps Sal Rinauro for that and he sells it. So we're continuing that. Sal is kind of the bitch, the dog's bullocks of this stable. But
it's funny that like when Daisy turned and joined the Embassy at, I believe it was Vendetta in 2005, we were both like, oh, we didn't totally remember Daisy Hayes turning and joining the Embassy, but it's weird because she's been such a big part of that act and she's been great in that act. I really think she's added a lot to Jimmy Rave's entire shtick and just the Embassy in general. I've been really impressed watching her stuff and watching what she's brought to the table during this whole era that we've been covering.
I agree. And like one thing I remember from a Jimmy Rave shooter review was him talking about like how much he always enjoyed like having all these pieces to work with, like as an entourage with the Embassy, and how he'd always try and work hard to make sure they all had something to do in matches, even in interference and stuff. And you can really see it, like even like when Mike Cruel was temporarily there, like they always like everyone in the Embassy, they always have a line in the promos. They always seem to have a bit of more of a character to them than you'd expect. They have like a very defined role. Even in matches like this, it feels like they always work pretty hard to make sure Daisy gets like at least one notable spot interfering. Like it feels like they worked with the Embassy. They worked really hard to make sure no matter how small you were in the group, you always got a little bit of something at least, which is nice because a lot of stables you don't always get that. But I would say this match is another example of how much of a dependable old school mid-card heel Jimmy Rave was. Like, I know Rave and Rinauro were friends before this, and they had worked in the same circles and feds prior to this, but this is only their second match together in this new Embassy tag formulation, and so much of their act is already set in stone because they're doing so many of the things they already just did in the first match they had together. Like, they're already repeating everything from Sal getting slapped by Rave during the match, the Sal cleans off the opponent's hands before they can shake Jimmy's hand to make sure like it's all sterile for Jimmy bit. There's doing bits where like there's moments in the match where Sal's only getting control because Rave, as the illegal man, goes out of his way to like interfere and get Sal like the control. All that stuff, was right there from the first match they had together here. They're doing it again here. But it also continues the weird story we talked about in their first match together, which is they continue to act on commentary in the wrestling like how Sal is 8 miles below everyone else in the stable when, again, I won't belabor the point. He's the only one here that's ever held a Ring of Honor title, but I realized they thought that would be like the story that would help get him over. As far as the match itself, I would say this is like a Jimmy Rave undercard match. He briefly stalls, he heals a bit, Daisy Hayes interferes in a neat little triple drop kick that all three of the Embassy do to someone in the corner. My one issue is that my favorite Jimmy Rave matches are when he finds this really nice balance between doing the old school heel stuff that no one else on the cards generally do, but he still kicks up into high enough gear with his opponent that it also kind of satisfies from an action standpoint. I thought this match was just a little bit off in that latter aspect. I felt like Richard and Clark are two guys who can do really cool stuff. They get to do some of it here, but rather than a showcase for them, this felt like much more like a Jimmy Rave match, one that would have been very similar that he could have done with a variety of opponents. And I would have liked to see maybe a bit more of the faces on offense, maybe a bit more of a crazier run of offense at the end. But it's still like a decent, above average, Jimmy Rave tag match. You do get to see some stuff from Jarrell and Richards, but and also, if you're wondering why and Prince Nana isn't here, as always in the Midwest shows, it's always a coincidence when they do the Midwest shows that Prince Nana is often away, as Dave Prazak would mention, on government business. So that government business is always picking up when they have to go to Dayton and Chicago, Matt.
Nana does get a "We want Nana" chant, which you don't typically get for a heel, but I have to say Nana does deserve it, because if I was at a show, I would also want Nana. Now, I pretty much agree with what you said. I thought this was a pretty good match, like good tag match, and that everyone's good. I think we both agree that we're fans of Jarrell Clark's work that we've seen so far, what he's done in ROH. I wonder like how random his inclusion in this is, in the sense of like, what does he have to do with this? And I was wondering, because didn't really follow FIP, if there was some sort of feud with Clark and Renaro and FIP at some point, and maybe that's why he was there. I do know that later on he's in a faction with Renaro, but I don't think that existed in 2006. But I do enjoy it. I also enjoyed being reminded that Clark's submission move was called the Clark Bar. I definitely appreciate fun names. And I agree with you that like the one thing that brought this down from the Embassy match at Death Before Dishonor was the finishing sequence after Richards gets the hot tag was not as hot or fast paced as the one at Death Before Dishonor. But I did think the match was well structured. I thought it was fun, a lot of fun character work, as there almost always is in these Embassy matches. So I still thought it was pretty good.
And it is interesting where, this is a feud. Ring of Honor does a lot of parody booking, or trying to keep a lot of plates there and keep everyone with some heat. And this Richards feud is really notable. Again, it's Rave taking the finish here. Like, they're just, Rave doesn't really get his comeback. Like, Richards going to face him in one more singles. He's going to win again. Like, this is about as dominant a mid-card feud as you'll see in Ring of Honor, where, Rave loses in the beginning, he loses in the middle, and he's going to lose in the end. So,
yeah, so when you say it's about as dominant, it's 100% dominant. Like, it's just one guy wins all the matches.
And I did not put this in the notes, but aside, I should have brought this up. I don't even know. I forget some of the details now, but I noticed this in a week or two ago. I don't know if you saw this, probably not, Matt, but a long time ago, probably months ago, there's probably some neat Jarrell Clark spot in one of the shows we were watching, where occasionally if I see a really neat spot, I'll clip it and put it on Twitter. And someone made some comment like it was a Jarrell Clark doing a really cool thing, and I forget exactly the fan's comment, but someone found it on Twitter and was like, I bet he didn't set it up with a move after, or he didn't do something, he just no-sold or whatever after, something like that. And then I saw the other day in my mentions, Jarrell Clark, who much have been searching his name, just replies to the guy, and he just clips the next spot to refute the guy's point, doesn't say anything to him. I just thought, good on you, Jarrell Clark. Like, you also are going to clip the shows, but this time to prove a point. Like, he wasn't like, fuck you. He's just like, I also have the DVD and I can show you that you're wrong, sir. And so I was like, good on Jarrell Clark. But hope you're doing well, Jarrell. But next, we join BJ Whitmer backstage as he tapes up his fists while more of that heavy guitar riff plays. I wrote in my notes, this goes on for slightly too long, but that's mostly what I have to say about that. That brings us to the Ring of Honor Pure title match. Nigel McGuinness defeated Colt Cabana by countout in 13:45. Now, Matt, before I want your overall thoughts, I want to ask you something first before we get to it. Did you notice anything weird about the finish?
Let me go back to my notes. When you say weird, I guess it depends on what you're getting at. If you if I mean, when you tell me, I might have noticed it, but there's nothing that I would describe as weird based on what I noticed.
Good, because a lot of times in my life when I don't catch something or something flies over my head, like you're my metric of if I should have known it or not. So like if Matt doesn't know it, I feel better about myself. So here's the thing I didn't notice, and I'll point it out, and then we'll get the overall thoughts on the match. But for those who haven't seen the match, it's a standard. We'll describe it in detail in a second. Nigel McGuinness cheating, shitty count out finish the way that he's been doing in this gimmick as pure champion. And I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary for it. And then after I watched the show, when I was going through doing my research, I found this note in the Observer from Dave Meltzer, getting live notes from people. He wrote, "In a pure title match, Nigel McGuinness was ruled the winner over Colt Cabana via countout. This had a screwed up finish. The countout was supposed to be the finish, but McGuinness actually didn't beat the 20 count and was still out of the ring. Fans didn't exactly like that, and they announced him the winner anyway. This will be edited on the DVD to appear that McGuinness did get back in the ring on time." Now, Matt, I read this and I go, am I insane? I didn't notice that at all. So, Matt, I go back and watch this. They do not edit. One, this is true. And two, they do not edit the finish at all. If you pay attention, you won't. Most people probably won't if you and I didn't notice it. But if you listen to Todd Sinclair count as the final little angle where Nigel attacks Colt from behind, shoves him under the ring, Todd Sinclair actually counts to 20, like a full second before Nigel goes in the ring. And they do not edit it out, or I don't know if that would have even been possible. They don't stay too long on the post-match reaction, so if the crowd did have a negative reaction. But I did not notice that. But if anyone that is going to watch the match afterwards, it absolutely should have been a double count out, and it isn't.
Well, I guess it's clever sleight of hand in the sense of like they just took for granted that people would not be paying attention to Sinclair's count. They would be watching the wrestlers and listening to the commentary, and it seems like they were right. So
we both missed it again because the angle is happening right a second before he gets in the ring. So you're too busy. No one's like, I'm focusing on the ref reciting a number that I know is coming.
No, it's a classic misdirection magic trick. Like you're just don't notice it because you're not paying attention. So. You know what? I probably would have done the same thing if I just would have not edited it and been like, no one will care. No one will notice. And until they listen to this annoying-ass podcast by us.
Yeah, now that we've shined a spotlight to the I mean, we do. I haven't seen our listenership in a long, long time. I imagine we do decently, but like, I don't know how many people are going back. I know some people are.
I could tell you the listenership if you want to know. I could add up all the different places where people watch and tell you.
That might just depress me at this point. So, Matt, what'd you think about the match?
I'm just curious to know if you'd be depressed if a lot of people listen to us, or depressed if not enough people listen to us. Because I guess I could see someone being depressed at either metric. So it was an interesting match in that it felt like a tribute match to their 2005 feud. Like that first, like, let's say 2/3 of the match, they were doing all their like comedy stuff / European artful dodger, silly headlock reversals, and playing with the referee and stuff like that. And it was definitely a lot of allusions to their series the year before, where they were working that style. So if you really enjoyed that series, I could see you enjoying this part, just to be like, oh yeah, it's an homage to but it didn't feel like the genuine article. You know what I mean? Like it didn't feel like they were really fighting to win. It felt like they were just having fun playing with their series of matches. So I could see either reaction to that. And then the last part of the match, they sort of very suddenly get much more intense. And the finish becomes basically, because during a lot of the match, Nigel's not really being particularly heelish at all. In fact, he does that thing at the beginning where Todd Sinclair explains the rules, and usually he like interrupts him and does a heel promo, but instead this time he just said to Sinclair, thank you very much for for explaining the rules. Like, it was like, and I actually wrote this. I said, is he being a disingenuous little scamp, or is this his official face turn? And I think we could probably say at the end it was that he was being a disingenuous little scamp, right?
Yeah.
So he's done a few of these like shady count out finishes. I thought this one was probably the most clever in the sense of he escapes the ring after Cabana gets a bunch of offense. And he says, tomorrow's the biggest match of my career. He apologizes to the crowd, but he says he can't finish the match. And he says, no one wants to see a cheap count out. So Cabana should come out and take the count out with him. It's the only fair thing to do, Nigel says, which was very funny. Because the pure title rules are such that if Nigel gets counted out and Colt doesn't, Nigel loses the title, right? That's the rule. So Cabana comes out. He says, what do you take me for? And then he uses the R word, Nigel. And Colt refers to himself as a Chi-Town thug, which is also very funny. And he won't take Nigel's count out. And Colt says, I'm going in and you could stay here or wrestle me. And that's, of course, when Nigel jumps in from behind, rolls him under the ring, which I thought was a very funny extra little touch, and then gets in just, I guess, after the 20 count, but we were supposed to pretend it's just before the 20 count. So, I mean, that definitely makes Colt look as stupid as humanly possible, but I guess we have established that he doesn't know what the word unify means. So I guess his character at this point is that he's just incredibly stupid.
Well, it's funny because in that promo we just recapped, Colt just said it's not about who's the smarter wrestler, it's about who's the better wrestler. It's like this match was like, no, it's about who's the smarter wrestler because he completely clowned you. Yeah,
but it's also funny that like they've decided that Colt's gimmick, at least for a little while, is that he's just like full on really dumb. He's become a dumb jock that's just like banging babes in the car, like, which I don't feel like was ever Colt's character before this or after this. There's just like this few month period where this is who Colt Cabana is. I don't think it fits him, but that's what they went with. And I guess the finish does fit that. So I actually enjoyed the finish. I've read some reviews of people that really didn't like it. I enjoyed it. The match itself, I don't know. I feel like it was just a little bit too much of a tribute act for me. But there was some funny stuff. There was, like all the stuff where Colt grabs Sinclair's hand to get out of the headlock. And then, there was another spot where Colt does like a neck bridge while on top of Nigel, and Nigel yells, "Get him off of me!" And then he
just won't let go of the bridge.
Yeah, and then he yells at Sinclair, like whose side are you on? Which I thought was pretty funny. But yeah, I don't know. I like the finish more than I like the match itself.
Yeah, I agree here too with you. This felt like one of those first half of a double shot B-show matches where two talented performers are not going all out the way they could. And oftentimes those kind of matches disappoint me. This one didn't disappoint me that much because a lot of those disappointing B-show matches, they're like bad versions of like, or stripped down versions of like big Ring of Honor main event style matches where it's just like kind of a colorless match with less action, where this was like a slowed down version, as you said, of more of their earlier comedy European network inspired stuff. And even though this was them playing the hits and we've seen most of this stuff done better, not just better, but better against each other, it was still different enough on this card, and we don't see it that often these days in Ring of Honor. I was like, oh, even a B-level version of this is enjoyable enough. Getting some comedy, some fun mat work, stuff like that. But yeah, if you're expecting this to be close to like their very best matches, this isn't going to be a soccer riot or anything like that. This is on that level. But I also, knowing that we're losing our beautiful Nigel, more comedic, rapscallion boy, he's going to become more serious, big bomb throwing Nigel. I do in some ways savor these last few performances where he kind of goes to this. In fact, this match is such a throwback that we've documented that like the evolution of Nigel when he started, before he did the rebound lariat, for a few shows, he did like the rebound off the ropes and then he would end in a roll up. For some reason, this is such a throwback in this match when he does the rebound off the ropes, even though he's just been doing the rebound lariat to that rebound for months and months now, he does the roll up again. So it's like these two guys decide to go in a time machine from like a year and a half ago and be who they were then, except for, as you mentioned, Colt in full stupid mode now. The ending, I can see both sides. I did like it. At first I wrote my notes. I don't know if I like it or I don't, but I like the almost meta absurdity of it where, like you mentioned, Nigel is selling an ankle injury during the match and then or a knee injury. And then he goes outside. It's like, hey, could you do a double count? I have the biggest match of my life tomorrow. This isn't fair. Could we just do it? And I love the fact that I love the fact that he goes, I'd love to finish this match for you nice people. The fact that he calls the crowd nice people for some reason just got to me. And it's so meta in the sense of we all know Nigel always loses. He's been winning matches by count. The fact that he gets on the mic and is like, nobody wants to see a shitty count out finish. And then Colt comes out and is like, I'm not going to fall for this. And then you see a shitty count out finish and Colt does fall for this. Like, people are either going to love or hate that. I ended up, the more I think about it, the more I think I love that. It sounds like you did too. I can see, though, why people would absolutely hate that. So I thought this was like a low good. This is an enjoyable enough match. And I did have one other thing I would say, Matt, that I like, even though I hate, which is I love documenting any time in a pure match where there's an unintentional moment where the rules should have been used and they're then ignored because no one planned for it. And the moment in this match is early on in this match is a moment where Nigel's selling on his ass near the ropes and he's trying to get back to his feet. So he grabs onto a rope to help him get back to his feet. And during that moment, Colt grabs Nigel and is trying to pull him off the ropes and the ref breaks them up. He's like, no, he's grabbing the ropes. You're you can't do this. And so the crowd's all expecting, oh, you're going to call for a rope break. And the ref does not call for a rope break, and they all start booing and going apeshit for booing the fact that Nigel got a rope break, and the ref decided not to call it a rope break, and then Nigel he goes and he shakes the ref's hand, and I thought that's some great little that all seemed like that was not an intentional spot, but I just love that Nigel in the moment is just I know what my character would do here, and just sucks up to the ref more. I thought that was very cute, but
I agree. I mean, and it just. Watching these finishes just make me think ROH has not done anything too clever or creative with the pure title since bringing it back in these matches.
Yeah.
Let's bring back some fun and creativity in some of these pure title matches.
Yeah, we talked about that on another show, but yeah, we will continue to campaign. There's been enough time. The idea is fresh again. You can do one more heel reign like this.
Let's have Shibata goad somebody outside to take a count out.
He's always like, I'd love to finish this match for you nice people, but have you guys ever heard about my brain injury? That time that Dave Meltzer said my brain got removed from my skull and then they put it back in, and then he just
that would be a funny promo from Shibata if he actually mentioned remember how Dave Meltzer said that?
I would love that more than more top 3 things I want from my life now in general, not just wrestling related, but next, we get a video clip of Bryan Danielson turning on Samoa Joe at Cage of Death at the last show, Death Before Dishonor 4. As a Gabe Sapolsky voiceover tells us, Joe is out this weekend with a knee injury suffered as a result of that Bryan Danielson chop block. But he does add that Joe will be contributing a video message later in the show, and that also that he has signed a contract to face Bryan Danielson for the Ring of Honor title in a match in the coming weeks for a show that will be titled Fight of the Century. So yeah, it's the rare double shot, Matt, that we do not get Samoa Joe, which is, I guess, another sign of things to come, which we'll be seeing Joe less, and then we'll be seeing Joe a lot less in the not too distant future. So, yeah. And that brings us to Matt Sydal defeating, finally, Christopher Daniels, scored to the ring by Allison Danger via pinfall in 13:26 after he won via I guess that move Trent Beretta calls the crunchy. I guess I think that's one of those moves that a few wrestlers have used with different names, but kind of like a weird pile driver variation. I would say about this match, Matt, I think I would compare this to how I felt about the last match, which was this bout had something that often annoys me, but doesn't bug me in this match as much as it usually does. And in this case, it's that Christopher Daniels is kind of grounding his opponent in a bit of a boring way. I think Christopher Daniels is a really talented wrestler, but he can lull me to sleep sometimes, especially more in the last this year of Ring of Honor. But in this match, it actually has a point, because the whole story of this match, of course, is that these two have wrestled each other what feels like a million times. Seidel's lost every time. In fact, the story of this match is Seidel's just coming back from his tour of Dragon Gate. In fact, he's wearing a Dragon Gate jacket with his name on the back as he makes his entrance here. He gets like a welcome back chant, or that might have been Jack Evans. I forget if both of them get a welcome back chant. At least one does. But anyway, the idea is Seidel, when he comes back, his request is, I want to come back. I want to face Daniels one more time. I need to beat him. And so Daniels here, being the far more established veteran that's beaten him every time, it makes sense for Daniels to wrestle this way on this show, to ground him, for Seidel to really have to fight for underneath, to earn his comebacks that come sporadically until the last final few minutes where they're really going back and forth. And so it's a way Daniels can wrestle that sometimes I find boring. I felt like it worked better for this match because there was a purpose. And I thought the end of this match was a little elevated by their history, because earlier on, Dave Prazak mentions on commentary how Daniels has been beating Seidel with a different finisher every time. And while I'm sure the live crowd probably wasn't paying too close attention, probably had cut up on the DVDs, and they would pop just as big for those moments regardless, watching at home and knowing that, it did give me a little extra juice when you see, oh, Seidel, kicks out of the best moonsault ever. He survives the Koji clutch, And then I like the ending too, where Seidel turns the Koji clutch into like a cradle for a near fall that I totally would have bought into if I was watching this live. And then Daniels immediately gets up looking pissed and aggressively goes for the Angel's Wings, almost like with having the air of like, okay, this kid survived two of my finishers. Enough of this shit. I got to beat him right now. And then Seidel counters the Angel's Wings into that crunchy kind of reverse pile driver for the win, which is a nice callback to their last match where Seidel went for the Angel's Wings and Daniels just flipped it into a pin and won that way. And this time, Seidel has the counter for the Angel's Wings and he wins here. I thought overall the match was like a high good. It wasn't notable enough. You have to go out of your way and see this. I think I might have liked one of their other matches better, but I do want to emphasize my last thing, how great I thought Matt Seidel's execution of moves was in this match. He's one of the smoother wrestlers of his generation, at least certainly in the U.S. Indies, and he was so on point here. Like, his regular spots were great. He does this awesome tilt-a-whirl head scissors where he starts by springboarding off the ropes into almost like a bulldog position, and then in midair, spins around into a head scissors. He does big jumping off the ropes, like spiking a guy DDT is really cool.
That was fantastic, the way he executed that move.
Yeah, I've seen that before, but this is about as good as I've ever seen him hit. And even just his bumping, he makes Daniels look like a monster here. There's a moment where Daniels just does a Christopher Daniels clothesline, and Christopher Daniels clotheslines are fairly average looking. And Seidel takes a flip bump that makes Daniels just look like $1 million. And then later, Daniels does another move he does all the time, an SDO, and Seidel chooses to take it go fully vertical almost and lands on his shoulder and neck, which he might have done once before, but always he's bumping for Daniels in a way that very few guys do. And yeah, I enjoyed this.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you. I don't think it was my favorite match of the series. I do think it might have had the hottest crowd though. I like that they did do a callback for the finish, because I was a little bit disappointed that they didn't do more references to the previous matches, considering they had 3. I would have liked to see more takes on the different spots they had done previously. But, I did like that, Daniels did feel a little bit more, I suppose, arrogant in at the beginning. And, at one point he was standing on Seidel's neck, getting the crowd to cheer. There was in the early part of the match, there was this spot where both guys went for simultaneous arm drags, and I was surprised by if I just imagine that spot without seeing it, I would be like, oh, that's not that interesting. But it actually looked like it was really painful. When they both tried to aggressively arm drag each other, it's almost like they would rip their arms out of their sockets doing it. So I was like, that's a good spot. They just both
fall to the mat in pain, immediately,
yeah.
We just tore, yeah, like you said, just tore their arms out of their sockets.
Yeah, that's a good spot. I'd be curious to see that more often. And I wonder if maybe they don't do that because it actually is dangerous. You actually could tear your arm out of your socket. There was another spot where Seidel hit a leg lariat, and Allison Danger yelled, "Oh shit, Chris, he's back!" Which I thought Allison Danger also says something really funny after the match too, which I'll get to. But yeah, I appreciated the ending because it did have that callback. And the only other thing that I would say I was a little disappointed with in this match is after Seidel did a tour of Dragon Gate, I was hoping he'd come back with some more like new cool stuff. But he didn't really seem all that different in this match. Like, he was on point and he was really good, but like it wasn't like, oh, this is a new Matt Seidel with, you know, the Dragon Gate seasoning on him or anything like that. He did have, I think, new tights and a new ring jacket. So I guess there is that. The funny part after the match was, well, for one thing, I didn't really love that Daniels did like the Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 6 thing, where as soon as he got pinned, he just popped right back up and is all frustrated instead of like just selling it. You don't really think of Daniels as the type of guy that's trying to big league somebody, so I have to give him the benefit of the doubt that that's not what he was doing here, but it didn't really work that well for me. And then the other thing is, as he was walking away all mad before he put over Seidel, Danger goes out to the aisle with him, and she goes to him, "That ref sucks cock. I hate him." Which is just a really funny thing for her to say. Especially just adding the "I hate him" part to it.
I love when you hear Allison Danger ring talk, because like it's very rarely, like it's very unsubtle, like you were talking about, like it's always just like, oh, he's gonna get you now, like hit him, Chris, like just it's the most basic things. But I actually appreciate, because she's saying it so loudly and enthusiastically and like urgently.
Well, it reminds
me, there's
me,
such conviction.
It reminds me, I was in a little league when I was a kid, and like it was a bad little league. Like, we were not like, these are all the kids that just like sucked, you know, and like so because I wasn't good, and you know, some of the dads would try to, you know, every once in a while, like the dorky dads or the dorky kids would try to be the manager of the team. And so they weren't like, they didn't have any skill at doing that. So I just remember there was one year where the dad who was in charge, whenever somebody was pitching, and I think usually he put his son as the pitcher, he would stop the game, just like go out and quote, talk to the pitcher, but he would usually just go out and be like, "Let's go." And you're just like just unsubtle stuff, like, "Come on, get him," like, you know, like stuff like that. Just that's what it reminded me of when you said unsubtle strategy from the sidelines.
So one thing before we get to, I'll describe what happened after the match just to fill in any gaps. Not although you did a good job, but like one thing I want to mention, last thing in the match, and again, this is a dumb thing that probably no one will like except me because it's a very minor thing, but there's a moment in the match where a fan starts a fallen angel chant, and normally you get chants like that like when a wrestler is like in trouble or something. This is Christopher Daniels is holding a chin lock on Matt Seidel, and the fan's like, you know who needs a boost right now? Christopher Daniels, like when he's applying a chin lock. And for some reason I got a real kick out of that, but
as Nigel McGuinness said, those fans are just nice people.
Nice, very hot, sweaty people. But so yeah, as Matt mentioned, Daniels immediately pops up after the pinfall, and so yeah, I would imagine maybe that his intention was, I'm selling my anger. But like Matt said, I had the same thought as you did, Matt, which was that kind of comes off as weird, because in Ring of Honor, like, very rarely do you ever see anyone not like really sell a loss. So the idea of seeing like that Hogan-esque immediate stands up, not the worse for wear. Yeah, I noticed that too. But anyway, Daniels has a bit of a temper tantrum. He kicks the ropes in frustration. He briefly yells at the ref, like, you know, the usual, that wasn't 3, blah, blah, blah. Crowd chants for Seidel, and Daniels initially leaves without giving a handshake, which is, you know, interesting because he had just started the gimmick of, oh, I'm going to start shaking everyone's hands. And that actually draws some boos from the crowd, even though Daniels is typically a huge fan favorite at this point in Ring of Honor.
But this is his official first handshake that he's given after he loses to somebody, which is noteworthy, right?
I didn't realize that. That is very interesting. That's good to point out. Yeah. Huh. You're right. I think you're right. Matt, my memory is terrible, but I
guess it is possible that I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right.
So Allison Danger on the floor, apart from talking about how the ref likes to do certain sexual acts, she tries to talk some sense to Daniels as the crowd chants, shake his hand. Daniels eventually does get back in the ring. He grabs the mic and he says, there's only one reason Matt Seidel beat me tonight. He gives you that pause because you think, oh shit, he's going to come up with an excuse. And he goes, and that's because he was the better man. He goes, if I'm going to be gracious in victory, I damned sure will better be gracious in defeat. He tells Seidel he's earned this, and then he shakes Seidel's hand. The crowd chants Ring of Honor. or ROH. Daniels has one more thing to say. He mentions that he knows Sydal and AJ Styles put together one hell of a tag team in ROH, and he knows AJ has been a part of ROH in the last couple of months, which I should note, AJ Styles literally wrestled on the very last show before this one. So he wrestled Davey Richards. But anyway, so Daniel says, Matt, if you ever want a tag team partner, I'm your man. So we, unlike the last time Daniels did something like this, where he got on the mic and was like, hey, if you need help with the CZW war, and no one took his offer, this offer will be taken quickly.
Yeah, no, Chris, we're good. I think we just need Ace Steel. That's what they said.
Next, we get another backstage clip of BJ Whitmer as the very feedbacky guitar riff continues to play. BJ is rocking back and forth as he sits down. He's breathing heavy, so possibly having a panic attack. I don't know. I've been there, BJ. Just stay strong. Next
panic attack, or gallbladder attack. Either way, Trevor's been there.
Deep Trevor name lore that Matt is picking up. So next we have a dark tag team match. This did not air, which is another interesting one, Matt, because I feel like the Irish Airborne have a couple of these lately where there appeared to be time on the DVD and they did not put it on, because I think this DVD ends like 15 or 17 minutes before 3 hours. Like, it did not go to the 3 hour mark like some do. And yet this did not air. This was the Irish Airborne of Dave and Jake Crist defeating Ring of Honor students Alex Payne and Pele Primo. The only possible reason why maybe this didn't air comes from a Chris Johnson PW Torch Live report, where he writes, the Irish Airborne beat Alex Payne and Pele Primo. This was nothing more than a squash in favor of Irish Airborne. At one point, Pele took a really bad fall and hit the back of his head on the ring apron and the floor. So maybe they didn't want to show that. But otherwise, I feel like there's been a couple Irish Airborne matches lately that they're kind of getting pushed, but kind of also not getting pushed, it feels like.
There's clearly some element of, we're not always so happy with their performances going on in ROH land.
Yeah. And obviously we just covered recently that Briscoe's tag, which was not terrible, but not what you'd hope for as like a potential, make their name kind of level match. But we move on to a non-title four-corner survival match. Non-title because there's two champions in this match. Tag champion Austin Aries defeats world champion Bryan Danielson, as well as Delirious and Homicide in 18 minutes, 19 seconds when he pinned Danielson after he hit a 450 splash. Matt, before I give it to you, we should establish what the rules of this match are, because they're kind of simple but kind of confusing, and I kind of appreciate what Gabe was trying to do, but I don't think it quite worked. So
you're like, I kind of appreciate it, but I don't appreciate it.
I mean, in theory, it sounds so. Okay, here's the part I appreciate. I've seen, I'm a little harder on these four ways than you. So many of them, they feel meaningless. I appreciate that he tried to give this match actual stakes. So the stip was Aries, is the tag champ. Danielson's the world champ. If either of them get the fall, these four ways are obviously always one fall to a finish generally. So always they're usually one fall to a finish. If either champion scores a fall on anyone else in the match, that person can't challenge them for their title for the rest of that person's reign. So, like, let's say Danielson pins Delirious. Delirious can't challenge for Danielson's world title for the rest, as long as he holds the title for the rest of this run. On the other hand, if Delirious or if anyone, if Delirious or Homicide pin one of the champions, they get a future title shot against that champion. Or I guess if that matter, if one of the champions pins the other champion, they get a future title shot against that, because that's obviously Aries will get a future world title shot against Danielson for this. So in theory, it's almost on the verge of being too complicated. But here's the problem, Matt. I don't know, maybe I missed this on commentary, but I never hear the commentary address the following things, which is, what happens if Homicide – you talked about this earlier. What happens if Homicide pins Danielson since he's already owed a world title shot? Does he get 2 world title shots? What happens if Danielson pins Homicide? Like, does that overrule the fact that Cornette already agreed to give him a world title shot, or does that supersede it? And also, what happens if Delirious beats Homicide or Homicide beats Delirious? Do they just get nothing? Like, there's so many weird little – it's too complicated, but it's not thorough enough at the same time. So –
well, clearly if Homicide beats Delirious or Delirious beats Homicide, they're going to get that championship committee to maybe put them in the contender circle.
But it's one of those things where it's just I appreciate the intention behind it, but the execution is very confusing. But
I think probably what it comes down to is none of that other stuff matters, because Aries is going to pin Danielson, and that's all there is to it.
with the classic ROH thing from the same Ring of Honor logic of DQs only matter like once in 6 months when we decide we need a DQ. So,
Yep.
Matt, what do you think about this as a match? A pretty star-studded 4-way.
Yeah, I thought it was good as these things go. Like, it was, I would say, fun, which is usually what the best you can expect from these matches. It wasn't very intense for the vast majority. Then they just pack a ton of huge spots into the last 2 minutes. Like, it was just like, wow, they just like flipped a switch. It was one of those matches where it's like, they're sort of like having a B-show match, and then they turn it into like an A-show effort just for like an incredibly condensed amount of time. So like, I would say very entertaining, but not a lot of like weight to it, or gravitas, I guess would be another word to say. It was funny because with Homicide, we were talking about how we would expect him to be really pissed off because of what happened on the very last show in terms of with Cornette. But instead, at the beginning, he just seems like surly. Like he's like at one point a fan says something to him, and then Homicide just yells at the fan, tells him he has a little dick and that his wife has AIDS. He's just like running through stock insults, and then he also gets mad that everyone else is shaking hands, and he's like, I'm not going to go anywhere near Delirious. Like, he just seems like in a mood, but not in a rage, which I don't know. I guess it's something at least. Danielson is pretty funny here because you never notice how, like, there's two Danielsons. Like, even as a heel version of Danielson, there's the one that's like the very confident ace type heel. And then there's the B-show Danielson, who like just really plays up the comedic aspects of his character more. And I feel like that's what we were getting here. Like, he plays like super terrified of both Homicide, which makes some sense, and Delirious. Like, he's afraid of getting in the ring with either of them. And so we get a lot of Delirious versus Homicide, and then Homicide gets scared and tags out because Delirious is just like rambling so much at him. And Aries is like the only guy that doesn't seem scared of Delirious. So Aries and Delirious have a match, and Delirious keeps confounding everyone. He gets whipped into the corner, slides out of the ring, runs around, knocks Danielson off the apron, then runs back into the ring, clotheslines Danielson. So this part of the match, again, it's fun. It doesn't feel like a major match with major stars, but it's fun because they're all really good. So they execute it all well. But there's a lot of stalling and like silliness for the first like 5 or 6 minutes of the match. Eventually we finally get like the real serious stuff where it's Aries versus Homicide, but then Danielson tags in against Aries, and he's quite aggressive, so he's not chickening out anymore. And we get Aries and Danielson, which obviously is a good combination. And it just goes back and forth like this. There's there's a spot on the floor where Homicide stalks Danielson, and Danielson backs into Aries, who chops him, and then Aries and Homicide double team Danielson, and Delirious comes off the top rope with a flip dive. And then actually back in the ring, Danielson gets the airplane spin on Delirious. I like that we've noticed that like Danielson has brought back the airplane spin after it has been absent for a while. One thing that, I think both of us really like about Danielson is that he works stuff in and out. He's always like, what can I do that's different? And bringing back the airplane spin for a little while, it's different because he hadn't been doing it for the first half of his title reign, really.
Watching Bryan Danielson in this era is like following like a band you really like. We're like, oh, they added that song back to the set list. Like, it's like, oh, you should have been there, man. Danielson brought out, the airplane spin. He hasn't done that in years, man. Like, it's just weird, but it's neat in a really cool way. Yeah.
So then we get into this final, like, very few minutes of this heavier action. Danielson misses the flying headbutt on Delirious. Then Homicide misses a diving headbutt on Danielson. Then Aries misses a frog splash on Homicide. Then Delirious hits the Shadows over Hell on Aries, but he kicks out. And then Delirious hits the clotheslines in the corner on Aries. Aries blocks the Bulldog. He comes back with the Shinbreaker suplex combination. He goes for a superplex on Delirious, but Homicide knocks Aries to the floor and hits the super ace crusher on Delirious, and goes for a lariat, but Danielson catches his arm, but Homicide ends up hitting Danielson with the lariat anyway. And then Homicide goes for the cop killer. Aries breaks that up, throws Homicide outside. lariats Danielson and immediately hits the tope on Homicide. And then we get Danielson versus Delirious for a little bit. Danielson does the elbows, but Delirious escapes, goes for his own elbows, punt to the head, then another one. Then he gets the Cobra stretch on Danielson. And at this point, the crowd definitely is excited. They're chanting tap for Danielson, but he gets his foot on the bottom rope. Eventually, Danielson does his cool thing where he does this like reverse headlock takeover into the cattle mutilation on Delirious, but Aries blind tags Delirious's leg, unbeknownst to Danielson, and hits the 450 while Danielson is bridging in the cattle mutilation, and gets the pin. That final few minutes, as they often are, it was super exciting, but, the rest of the match was them having fun. Again, in a quality way, because they were all really good, but it was them having fun in a four-way and then doing a lot of big moves at the end. And that's basically what it was. It was enjoyable, but nothing particularly memorable or substantive.
Yeah, for me, I can kind of split this match into thirds. Like the first third, I would say, is like a testament to the power of having an over wacky gimmick in wrestling. Because I think one of the observer notes was like a bunch of people had written into Dave and said like Delirious was the star of this match. And in a lot of ways, especially in the first third, he is the star of this match, which is again the power of like an over comedy gimmick where he's in the ring with three of the biggest stars in the promotion. He's a mid-carder. And he's kind of stealing the show because everyone's reacting to him. And the reason why is because Delirious is really a really fun gimmick to react to. I was thinking, well, why is that? And I think why that is because his character makes you have to do a reaction that wrestlers very rarely do. I guess unless you're Austin Aries, which is, a lot of times in wrestling you either get like react out of two ways, right? You're angry at somebody or you're scared of them. People, like, when they react to Delirious, it's always, like, you said a word for it earlier, like, confusion or something like that. Like, they're always befuddled and almost intimidated, but not scared. Like, the reaction I realized was there's that GIF people use a lot, which is Tong Dolan from Blink-182, the first date music video where he's going, what the fuck? Like, just in a really exaggerated way. And I feel like Delirious, like, when you face Delirious in this era, it's your chance to basically make that GIF yourself. Everyone gets to do their own flavor of that because, like, Homicide is great here. It's just being, like, you're seeing the most intimidating, grittiest character in the promotion, and he's just completely, like, does not know what to do with Delirious. Like, he's just like, what the fuck is this guy doing? I don't know how to handle this. And, the middle third of this match, unfortunately, is, I think, a good example of one of the reasons I really don't like four-ways often in Ring of Honor, which is it's really talented wrestlers doing a minute or two of mid-tier time-filling wrestling and then tagging out. The cycle repeats. Nothing really builds. No one really gets in a groove because everyone's just swapping out every minute or two. It's not fast and exciting enough to be a spot fest, and it's also not really telling a story. And four-ways can be exciting spot fest. They can tell, intricate stories, like the Crowning of Champions for which we really liked, but back in the first year of Ring of Honor. But a lot of the times they don't. They're more like this match. But then, like you mentioned, the last third, they do the thing I always talk about a lot of times in these matches. They flick the switch, and the last third is just them after, like you were saying, kind of doing a B show, just having fun, just not high stakes level stuff. They just start doing a barrage of signature moves and working pretty hard, and it's nothing that's really imaginative or reinventing the wheel, but it's fun enough. And overall, I would say this is good because the first third was kind of fun comedy. The final third's exciting enough. Maybe we would have had someone steal the win from Homicide to kind of continue the Homicide always gets screwed thing, but instead Danielson kind of gets the wins stolen from him. I don't really know if he necessarily needed that, but it's, a standard Danielson finish. We've seen that before where he has someone like cattle mutilation. Someone comes off the top to break it up and pin him. It's the classic, it kind of got good by the end four-way. I did like Delirious also grabbing a fan's hat and throwing it in the ring at Danielson. And that's that. So we get to the semi-main event. This is one of the two, in my opinion. If I was like buying this DVD at the time or going to buy a ticket, if there was I would say this show had two major selling points. This would be the first one. The Briscoes of Jay and Mark Briscoe defeated Jack Evans and Roderick Strong in 12:37 when Jay pinned Roderick after they hit a spike J driller on him. Jack Evans is also announced as making his return from Dragon Gate. He's wearing a Dragon Gate t-shirt. And yeah, this was a bigger deal for him than a lot of these other guys that were coming back from Dragon Gate, because Jack Evans had been on, I believe, like a 3-month continuous tour. So we haven't seen him in a whole season. Matt, this match, it's a rematch from their match at Best in the World, and I think we both thought that match was great, like one of the better Ring of Honor tags up to that point in the company's history. I would say this is a definite step down. It's shorter. It gets off to a hot start where Roddy and Jack, and the Briscoes brawl before like ring entrances even get done. But it quickly ends up, I would say, being kind of a lesser version of the first match. It's move to move. It's a fun match, and it follows the common Jack and Roddy tag structure of Jack kind of pops off on the offense to start. Then he plays the face and Farrell for a long time. Then Roddy gets a good hot tag. Then we get a back and forth final few minutes, and all of that's fun. And Jack he's kind of continuing the transformation he started before he went to Dragon Gate. He's got ring gear now. He's doing more kick variations, and that's fun, And Roddy's hot tag is always fun, and Jack taking a big beating is always fun. It's just everything's less fun than it was in their first match. It's a B show version of a great A show match, and it's not quite as big, it's not quite as imaginative, it's not quite as over the top. And as a result, I kind of noticed the cracks a little more. You start to notice more that they're just kind of doing stuff when it's not quite as fast. There's also slight bits of awkwardness I felt in this match, and I can't quite describe it. Everything just isn't flowing quite as smoothly as maybe their last matches you'd want it to. It's all still exciting enough that I would say it's a very low, very good. Still would be up to this point in my show, my favorite match on the card. I like that what takes Jack out of the match is he crash and burns on an ode to the Bulldogs, which is the move they beat the Briscoes with the last time they wrestled. And I like the story of the Briscoes actually beat Roddy and not Jack, which naturally gives them another reason to earn a third match for the title against Roddy and Aries, which is like, hey, we actually beat one of the champions here in a tag match. Enjoyable, but a little bit disappointing to me.
Yeah, I mostly agree with you. I actually wouldn't have this as my favorite match on the card so far. I thought this has been a solid show. Like there's nothing great on the undercard, but I liked just about everything. The only match I had really found disappointing was the Cabana versus McGuinness match, but everything else was good. This was the next match that I found kind of disappointing. And I think it was more formulaic than the first match, and I found it very surprising that it got less time than the other tag team match on the show. You'd think if you have Rave and Renaro versus Richards and Clark, or Evans and Strong against the Briscoes, which one would you give more time to? You would think it would be this one. But
this is the semi-main event of the show.
Yeah, so, but it didn't. It was pretty short. And I guess maybe the idea was, okay, we're just going to be really fast-paced. But I don't think it was that fast-paced to where it would justify, cutting a lot of time. There were little things that I think took it down. Like I thought when Strong finally got his hot tag, he's really good at these hot tags, but he gets cut off almost immediately. Mark hits him with a head and arm suplex, and it's like, okay, give Strong a better hot tag, and I think the match becomes better. Little things like that. The other thing that I was surprised by, this match had one of the lesser crowd reactions of the night. I thought this was a very good crowd overall, but this match I think might have had the quietest crowd of any of the matches. And I guess what that's a function of is that the crowd is tired, because this is one of those shows where they save the intermission until right before the last match because they have to set up a gimmick in the ring. Mm-hmm. But that's the only explanation I could think of for why the crowd wasn't hotter, because this was a very hot crowd, and they were not dead for this match, but they were not very hot either. So yeah, that first match, people still talk about it to some extent, to the extent that people talk about undercard ROH matches now. That's one they talk about, and this one really was forgotten pretty quickly, and I think it's easy to see why, comparing the two to each other. That one was just better. This was a good match, but forgettable.
And this is a match where my review is probably sounding a little bit harder than my rating, because it's just disappointing, because one, the first match these teams had in Ring of Honor was great, and two, I'm a big fan of both these teams. I mean, the Briscoes, in our opinion, is one of the best tag teams of all time, and Jack and Roddy are like one of my favorite, kind of not unsung, but they didn't quite get the mainstream big long run you'd want.
They're one of the great super short-lived tag teams. Yeah.
Yeah. So every time they are in the ring together, my ceiling for what they're capable of together is super high, and this does not, while being good, is not close to, I think, what their ceiling is. But next we go to a pre-taped Samoa Joe promo, that one Gabe promised earlier. Joe is somewhere, I guess it's some kind of training school, whether it be for martial arts or wrestling. It doesn't appear to be the Ring of Honor wrestling school. He says, he asked Bryan Danielson, he goes, "How are you doing, Bryan?" He calls him champion, then he kind of chuckles at that. Joe says, I'm in a place right now that you and me, Bryan, are very familiar with. He goes, that there's a bunch of mats, a filthy room, and a bunch of attitudes. It's a place where pro wrestlers come to get better, to get meaner, to train to win championships.
I was very surprised where he never just named the place. I thought I was waiting for him to do it, and he just never did.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, is this the New Japan LA dojo? Because they both used to train there. So I was just wondering. But, well, he goes, "Well, Bryan, you've been calling yourself the greatest. I've been rehabbing my knee. I've been making myself stronger here." Joe takes issue with their upcoming match being labeled the fight of the century, because Joe says it'll be the beating of the century, the massacre of the century. It'll be the crowning achievement of what Joe sets out to do, but it won't be a fight because it won't be competitive. He says he's going to take back what's his, the Ring of Honor World Championship. This is a good standard short Joe promo. I've seen a little bit better from Joe, but still good. Joe's a pretty good master of like the short and sweet promo here to get across his points. And I do like the end where he's like, you're labeling it the fight of the century. It's not going to be a fight. Like, I'm going to just destroy this guy.
Yeah, I agree with you. It was a good promo, but I've heard better from Joe.
And next we get another shot of BJ Whitmer, this time in his wrestling gear, walking back and forth in the parking lot as the same rock guitar riff plays. And wrestlers like in their wrestling gear in like outdoors will never not be ridiculous and kind of funny to me. And I realize this point of the segment is to get us more hyped up about the seriousness of this match. But just seeing BJ Whitmer in his trunks, like in a parking lot outside, I'm sorry, I can't take this seriously.
Well, so on the first War of the Wire, when it had Homicide and Carino, they would show both of them preparing, and a lot of it would be like Homicide backstage with his son and Guillotine Legrand, and they were all like anxious and stuff. It would have been funny to contrast BJ's preparation with like Necro Butcher, because you could just imagine Necro Butcher like this is no big deal to him at all. Like he's just like chilling, like like eating hot dogs or something like that.
Yeah, he's smoking weed and watching like reruns of Good Times or something, like just relaxing.
Yeah, that would have been that. I mean, obviously that would not be great for the tone, but would be amusing to me.
Yeah, I would have loved that. It would have completely ruined the mood. But two guys doing a podcast decades after the fact would have enjoyed it. But yes. Next we go backstage as it's intermission. Dave Prazak is joined by the embassy of Jimmy Rave, Daisy Hayes, and Sal Rinauro. Prazak says it appears that Davey Richards has Jimmy Rave's number, and Rave angrily says that's not true. He shoves Sal Rinauro by like the sides of his head into the wall, which looked not fun. Sal apologizes profusely, while Daisy says, I could take care of Davey. I could have taken care of him. Rave cuts a very quick, angry promo saying that Davey Richards' Ring of Honor career is going to be very short-lived. He calls him a fluke. Prazak's about to throw to a video package when he's told off camera, we have to go to the ring instead. And we do, to find Claudio Castagnoli and Nate Webb walking through the crowd to ringside. The house lights are on because this is during intermission. They had just finished setting up the barbed wire for the main event. The ring's all set up for it. Claudio grabs a mic, and the crowd almost immediately chants, "Shut the fuck up" at Claudio. Claudio says, "You all thought you got rid of me, but guess what? You were wrong." Claudio says his Swiss intelligence was too high for that, as he has an ROH contract, which means he will appear wherever he wants and do whatever he wants. Claudio starts speaking in a foreign language, I assume Swiss, and to prove how smart he is, and he trolls the crowd. Ace Steel and Colt Cabana then appear. Claudio goes running, but Ace starts hitting Nate Webb with the cowbell. Colt and Claudio brawl at ringside. This goes on for a bit. Colt rams Claudio's head multiple times to a chair held by a fan at ringside. Ace throws Webb over the barricade onto some chairs, which in a moment that really sums up Nate Webb's entire Ring of Honor run is him taking a brutal bump and not getting what he deserves from it because the camera basically misses it. It's not in the crowd to see him land on it. The brawl continues as Necro Butcher soon makes to his way to the ring with no ring music, nothing. And he's double fisting chairs. He's got one in each hand. Necro enters the ring as the others continue to brawl at ringside until a bunch of Ring of Honor wrestling school students and the refs break up the ringside brawl. BJ Whitmer then enters, just like Necro, to no fanfare or music. The ref sings "Ring the Bell," and we get a very abrupt start to our main event. But first, Matt, we just talked about a couple segments here. Did you have any thoughts? Especially, I appreciate, again, this is Ring of Honor dotting the I's and crossing the T's of basically saying, why is Claudio still going to wrestle on Ring of Honor when CCW just lost the feud? And while it's always funny to think of the idea that Ring of Honor had contracts in 2006, I do appreciate the idea of Claudio coming out and basically saying, like, look, I'm still going to be here no matter what. I've got a deal. You can't get rid of me.
Yeah, that part's good, although that doesn't explain why Nate Webb was there.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I thought that this whole brawl felt gratuitous to me. I was like, all right, I'm done with this stuff. This like Claudio comes out and then they run into the crowd and they fight in the crowd and someone holds a chair. And it's just like, all right, we saw Cage of Death. Let's move on. Like it just felt like a rehash. So I honestly didn't like that part very much.
It felt like a way to get Nate Webb and Ace Steel a payday and then to like have a kind of ECW-ish, like it just transitions to the main event, but neither guy gets entrances, which is funny because it's a very low-key way to start the match with like no entrances, and this brawl's been kind of taking the focus away until the ref is like, all right, let's start the match. But then it has like one of Ring of Honor's most ridiculous like graphics where it's like, got like a bloody barbed wire graphic saying this is a no ropes barbed wire match, and then it makes that explosion sound and the graphic explodes. It's like the most low-key Ring of Honor thing, right? Juxtaposed with like the most over the top thing, and that
move over robot arm. Hello, robot barbed wire explosion.
That brings us to the main event, the no ropes barbed wire match. BJ Whitmer defeats Necro Butcher via pinfall in 26 minutes 10 seconds after he hit an exploder. So Matt, before I throw it to you, second barbed wire match in Ring of Honor history. The only other one was Homicide versus Steve Corino way back in 2003, I believe. For those who haven't seen these matches, this is no ropes barbed wire, which means they've taken down all the ring ropes. They've put barbed wire on where the ropes would be. There are two barbed wire boards leaning up against turnbuckles. There's, I think, another barbed wire board at ringside. Well, eventually a ladder will come into play. There's chairs. So tons of plunder. And we get what we get. Matt, what'd you think about this match?
Well, it's impossible if you've watched, both ROH Wars of the Wire to not compare this to Homicide versus Corino, which is a much more legendary feud and match. And, I guess it's not more legendary than ROH versus CZW, but I think it is more legendary than BJ Whitmer versus Necro Butcher. And, it's interesting because, like, in a lot of ways, this match was much more exciting than that one. It had a much hotter crowd. That show, we talked a lot. If you ever go back and listen to the episode we did, that had one of the quietest crowds we had ever seen in ROH up until that point. Like, it was stunning how quiet that crowd was. And in some ways, that made the first War of the Wire match kind of a strange atmosphere, but I think both agreed it lent this air of like intensity and gravitas to the match. Like people were in like a hushed, kind of awe watching that match, and it made everything feel important and intense. Like in a weird, it's very weird for like a quiet crowd to work in a match's favor, but it kind of did, because then when the crowd did pop, it was like, holy moly. I remember like one of the biggest pops in that match was like for like a monkey flip into something, like some sort of barbed wire or something, and it's just like moments like that made it stand out. So that match was part of a more personal, intense feud, and I think it told more of a serious story and it felt more serious. So it was probably better in that way. This match was like the barbed wire match version of a spot fest. Like, it had a really hot crowd. and it had the hometown hero of BJ Whitmer. It had Homicide at ringside in BJ's corner, which I don't know, didn't really totally seem to fit Homicide's character. Like, it seems like at this point, Homicide would be more mad at, like, let's say Jim Cornette than he would be at Necro Butcher. But I mean, I guess it was just done for the match to add a little bit of star power and like have BJ feel like he wasn't, at a disadvantage. And in that sense, it helped. But I don't think...
And it's a nice callback to the first barbed wire match that
right.
BJ in his corner, a guy who granted, he lost the first one of those. They don't mention that. But
he has experience, yeah.
Yeah.
But like, it was just, oh my goodness, what kind of shit are these guys going to do to each other? And it's just, they do a lot of shit to each other. And I guess I could just run down a lot of it. But I will just say this to start. This match is 17 years old, so sometimes wrestling raises the stakes a lot over the years in terms of what's accepted, what's expected, what people will react to. And I will just say that if this match happened now, people would, let's say like on an AEW pay-per-view, people would be talking about it. People would say that was fucking crazy. It wouldn't have to be any different than it was for people to say that was a fucking insane match to have. I'm sure if you watched a lot of like CZW and death matches, this doesn't feel that crazy, but it does to me watching it now. So I can only imagine how it felt then. I mean, I guess I don't have to imagine because I watched it then, but I can only think about it because it seems crazy now. Like I'll go through a lot of the big spots. Obviously early on there's like teasing of going into the barbed wire, but once they get started, there's a spot where Necro does a chair-assisted body slam, which is one of his signature spots. He wraps a chair around Whitmer's head and neck and then hits another chair into it, which, honestly, of all the spots in this match, that's the one that I hated to see the most, because that's, like, brain-scrambling shit. So BJ blades his head, pretty good blade job. Then Necro scrapes the bloody head into the barbed wire to the point where it's, like, right near his eye, which the announcers point out, and it really was right near his eye. And it's just like, could you imagine, like, what would have happened if he just, like, put his eye into it? Like, it seems like it could have easily happened, right?
Yeah, and I mean, this should be obvious now. This is real barbed wire. Like, when you see guys, this is no softened tips or anything. Like, when you see guys get, like, pushed into the barbed wire, seconds when they pull away, you can see, like, the little pinprick blood cuts starting to bleed already. Like, it's very gruesome.
It's barbed wire, yeah. And the very next word I wrote in my notes was gruesome, because Necro put BJ in barbed wire and then picks his legs up so all his weight is coming down onto it. Whitmer hits a roaring forearm into a chair into Necro. And then Necro rams the edge of the chair into Necro's head, whereas now Necro starts bleeding. And I almost wondered if it was Hardway, but the way it was gushing out, it was like, okay, it had to be just like a really good blade job. Necro was bleeding a ton, like, instantly as soon as he blades. And now we start getting whips into the wire. Whitmer repeatedly drops Necro in different positions across the barbed wire. And then Necro sets up another barbed wire table. Besides the two in the ring, he sets up one outside the ring. At that point, Whitmer just hits a regular old pile driver. How quaint for a 2 count. And then they do a spot where Whitmer tries to powerbomb Necro over the top. I wrote the top wire, because there's no top rope. The top wire through the table, strand. But Necro escapes that. He tries it again. Necro escapes again, hits a big clothesline, and then he finds a pair of wire cutters, and they just do a whole segment where Necro is trying to stab Whitmer in the head with the edge of the wire cutters, and Whitmer has to fight that off. And this all builds up to Whitmer retrieving the wire cutters and cutting the top strand of actually cutting an entire side of the ring of barbed wire. So there's basically just like an exposed side of the ring with nothing between the turnbuckles. And so it's just completely exposed. And they fight over doing some moves on the exposed side. And then Necro hits a low blow, and just all of a sudden, does a power bomb where he steps to the side, and since there's no rope or barbed wire, they just fall off the apron through the barbed wire table, it was so insane because it was just very sudden and like felt out of nowhere, even though they had been teasing it. And of course, as you do in these matches, they have to use wire cutters now to cut BJ out of the barbed wire, especially his hair. Takes a while. And while they're cutting BJ free, Necro goes to get more chairs, and then they get back in the ring. BJ fights off Necro's shoulders, hits a brainbuster on an open chair, and gets a 2 count. That gets a surprisingly big pop because you'd think the audience would know, like, okay, the match is not going to end when there are 2 barbed wire boards, both set up in the ring, neither of which have been touched. And then you hear Homicide yell, "I got a surprise for you," and it gives him a sack, which, no, not broken glass, it is thumbtacks. Necro quickly does a double underhook powerbomb onto the tacks on Whitmer. Then Necro uses his hand to spread out the tacks even more. Sidewalk slams Whitmer onto them. Necro goes to attack again, but BJ throws a bunch of thumbtacks into his face, then drops him feet first on the thumbtacks, then exploders him onto the tacks, gets a 2 count. That was a hell of a sequence right there. Whitmer goes to send Necro into the barbed wire table in the corner, but Necro blocks it and hits what is basically a Death Valley driver through the barbed wire table that's set up at the corner. Then he throws more chairs into the ring, and while that's going on, Whitmer once again has to be cut out of the barbed wire. Necro tries to put an even bigger barbed wire, because the other barbed wire board's even bigger. He tries to put that onto 2 chairs, but Whitmer kicks the board into Necro's face and then drops it onto Necro's chest, basically like barbed wire side down. And then he beats the board onto Necro with a chair. And then Homicide pulls out 2 ladders. Fortunately, they only use one of them. But we do get a "Please Don't Die" chant, which I think is the first one we've heard of that in a while. And I'm thinking the same thing, even though this match was 17 years ago. So Whitmer climbs up so high that he's basically touching the ceiling, or he literally is touching the ceiling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he dives off with a splash onto the board on top of Necro, and Necro kicks out, and even I'm surprised at that one. Necro fights off an exploder, but BJ gets one suddenly at a very high angle, gets the win. Yeah, it's surprising how this match is not really talked about that much, because it really was an incredible spectacle. Like, again, like not the same level of intensity and seriousness of Homicide and Carino, much more of a spot fest, much less of a story. The story mainly being it's a culmination that BJ Whitmer takes a lot of punishment and keeps coming back and doesn't give up, and he slays the dragon in front of his hometown crowd while continuing to sacrifice his body. But yeah, if I saw this match happen today, I'd be like, that match is insane. They do a lot of insane stuff, and both these guys are insane, and that's my general feeling. I don't even know what star rating I'd give it, but I think I'd give it over 4 stars. I mean, it's really, really exciting and memorable. And yeah, that's my thoughts.
So I thought this easily qualifies as one of the most violent matches in Ring of Honor history, one of the most hardcore, whatever you want to say. I think it might be the goriest match in Ring of Honor history.
I hope so. Like, I hope we don't see stuff that's gorier.
I mean, apart from just like the Samoa Joe, Jay Briscoe cage match where like the blood coagulation is disgusting. I mean, just in terms of if you want to see, plenty of super close-up camera shots of barbed wire digging into people's bare backs, like, this is the match for you, folks. But this is in some ways like the grimiest a Ring of Honor hardcore match has ever felt. So a flaw in a lot of hardcore matches where it's a hardcore wrestler versus a wrestler more known for like regular matches generally is that from the start, the hardcore wrestler is going to take most or all of the biggest bumps. And if the regular wrestler is about to be teased to go into some horrible gimmick, it's going to be a reversed. I almost want to call this the Mick Foley problem, which, granted, a few wrestlers like Randy Orton have swerved us on the Mick Foley problem. But there's been a lot of Mick Foley matches where, if a big bump's being teased and it's not Foley, it's going to be flipped around. Triple H is not going to go through.
The Undertaker didn't also get thrown off the cage?
Yeah, Triple H was not going to, go through the ceiling of the cell in the Hell in the Cell match. But the Mick Foley problem does not exist here because BJ Whitmer takes as much, if not more, of the brutal spots in this match than the Necro Butcher. In fact, a lot of times, even when they both take a spot, it's BJ taking the spot first. BJ's the first guy in this match to go into the barbed wire, not Necro. When the thumbtacks come out, Necro maybe takes the worst spots, but BJ's the first guy to go into the thumbtacks. And again, he's not dressed up with like a bunch of t-shirts for like a hardcore match. He's just in his tights, his trunks, When the barbed wire boards come out, he's the one taking the bump through the table on the floor, although in the one spots I thought was stupid. I do think it was really dumb that when Necro power bombs BJ off the apron through the barbed wire table, he does like a sit out power bomb, which means he's also taking the barbed wire willingly. But I mean, that's Necro Butcher.
Yeah, I mean that fits Necro Butcher's character. You can't deny that.
Yeah, same with the barbed wire boards. BJ's going through them first, and everything he's doing first, he's doing just as much as Necro, if not more. And the match is also, again, long, which when you consider it's 26 minutes in that kind of heat. And you mentioned all show how hot this crowd is. I'm impressed that this crowd, after seeing an entire show, was as hot as they were for this match with this much heat going this long. Plenty of teasing with the barbed wire. One thing I also thought, some of the most gruesome stuff was not bloody. It was those two different spots where BJ goes through a barbed wire board and they have to cut his hair out with barbed wire because his hair gets completely snagged in the barbed wire. And both times it's so frustrating because the first time especially, it takes so long to get him out because they're trying to cut him free with the barbed wire, with the wire cutters. And when you look, what they're doing is they're cutting the wire, but they're like not cutting his hair. And in fact, they must have left like a piece of the barbed wire in his hair because at the end, when the match is over, finally someone must have gotten like a pair of scissors to Homicide, and he's trying to help out BJ even then. And like, it would be so much easier instead of cutting the barbed wire, just cut the hair that's snagged. Like, just cut a little bit of the hair and be free. Instead, it takes way long because they're like trying to cut the barbed wire that's around the hair and leaving the barbed wire in the hair. Like, it's crazy. But
I guess in the end of the day, it's like there's not really a manual for like, how do you get people out of barbed wire in the middle of a live performance? It's all just like making it up as you go along. I wonder how many no rope barbed wire matches there have actually like been in wrestling history. I'm guessing in some of these deathmatch promotions, probably kind of a lot, right? But like outside of those promotions, I guess what most of them would have been in like FMW or something. I don't even know.
Yeah, I'm not even
because ECW, as far as I can remember, there's like two relatively famous ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Did Axel and Ian Rotten have one against each other, or was that was a Taipei death match? I don't even remember. Maybe it was Sandman had one, and then obviously Terry Funk and Sabu was the most famous, but. I don't even know. I should probably look up like the barbed wire match history. Sandman and Cactus Jack, right? They're the ones that had the barbed wire match in ECW, right?
My memory is awful. I'm going to take your word for all of this, Matt. But for some, I would say this match will be great. It offers all the blood and barbed wire and violence I think you could possibly expect from this match. I can't see anyone watching this match. And like when we covered the Cage of Death match on the last show, we talked about, you pointed out, Matt, like we both thought the match was great. We gushed about the match, but you did point out correctly that like it was a cage of death match, but it wasn't really a CZW cage match. Like there were certain things CZW would go to that they wouldn't go to in Ring of Honor, like broken glass and stuff. This match, there was no broken glass. Maybe there was one or two things they didn't go to that CZW would have gone to. But this was a hardcore match where I feel like even if you were like a CZW fan or a hardcore death match fan with that level of expectations, I don't know how you could watch this match and come away disappointed. Like, I think they gave you everything you could have wanted. For me, it's very good. My favorite hardcore hardcore matches are things like the Homicide Steve Carell, not their barbed wire match, but like the Bitter Friends Stiffer Enemies match, which was our Ring of Honor match of the year for 2003, where there's plenty of violence and weapons, but also feels like a brawl, like the two people really hate each other, like there's some real substance to it too. Apart from a little ground and pound early from BJ, there's no real hatred in this match. This is, like you mentioned, you summed it up great when you said this is like a hardcore spot fest, where this is a match where once it gets rolling, they're just going from one brutal gimmick spot to the next, checking off boxes like, okay, we got this to do, we got this to do. It's more of a stunt show and more of an exhibition, but those stunts, those exhibitions are fucking brutal, crazy. They have a bunch of them. They're going all out. It's a completely wild spectacle, so I enjoy that in that way. At the same time, if you don't like this kind of match, if our description of this sounds like you would not like it, I guarantee you won't like it, because this is not going to win you over. I like the Homicide being in the corner as a nice touch. I like him having the thumbtacks for BJ after the last match had Homicide using the thumbtacks on Necro in one of the more memorable spots of that match. And Necro, obviously, I put over how much of a gamer BJ is in this match, but Necro, obviously, we expect it from him, but he obviously takes a ton of punishment in this match too, especially like the most brutal spots he takes in this match don't involve weapons, well, other than maybe like the brainbuster on the open chair. It's anytime he leaves his feet, because he so rarely gets off the ground and really doesn't get a lot of lift whenever he leaves his feet, I'm terrified. Like, there are multiple exploders and brainbusters he takes, and like, I'm always terrified that he's going to land right on his head. He barely gets over on some of these things, and he bleeds a crazy amount.
It's ironic that the way Necro Butcher gets over is by barely getting over.
So one other thing I had a problem with, Matt, in this match, I would say, is I do think it's a little like the pop they get for the big spot where BJ jumps off the ladder onto the barbed wire board that's wire side down on Necro and goes for the cover. That's a huge pop. That's a great near fall. But it is a little bit anticlimactic that I felt like that after all these crazy bumps, the fall comes like 20, 30 seconds later, and it's just a regular exploder. Now, granted, Necro barely gets over because he barely gets over on all suplexes. But I felt like in a way I can understand, like, that near fall is so good, it's almost worth it to kind of a like more anticlimactic finish. But I also feel like if you generally in wrestling want to end on the high point, like, man, that was a high point, and they just decide, no, let's just do another exploder. And I always also sometimes get a little. It's not like it's necessarily the worst thing in the world, but I sometimes kind of get a little bit chaffed when wrestlers, like, they have these brutal hardcore matches and then they end the match just with like a standard wrestling move. Like, after all this, just an suplex wins the match. But
yeah, sometimes there's a little bit too much of the mentality of we got to protect the finisher. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, no, just you could do something cool. How about instead?
So, I have a bunch of notes from the shoot interviews. Necro Butcher's done a lot of shoot interviews and media interviews, so I wasn't able to like scan over it with the time I had. A lot.
Before you get to that, I just want to confirm. Yes, it was. Yeah. It was Sandman and Cactus Jack in '95 that had the other big ECW no rope barbed wire match.
I see. And the other one. So, was there a name for that show? Or
that show was called. Let me just get barbed wire, hoodies, and choke slams. And it was on June 17th, 1995.
So Necro Butcher, from the shoot interviews I found, he mostly just says like this is one of his favorite matches, which is a sentiment BJ echoes. But in the BJ Whitmer shoot interview I saw, which is pretty good actually, BJ goes into this match in quite a bit of detail. There's some interesting stuff here. So first off, BJ says the impetus behind this match was Gabe wanted a singles blow off between him and Necro, and he wanted to give the Midwest fans in particular something special. And BJ points out at this point that, like, even though he's from northern Kentucky, which is like 10 minutes south of Cincinnati, Gabe always booked the Dayton market as if it was BJ's home area. And he says the reason why that is because he used to work for HWA, Heartland Wrestling Association, before he ever went to Ring of Honor, and they had TV in Dayton, and so because of that, they always ran their big blow-off shows every month, once or twice a month, in the Montgomery County Fairgrounds in Dayton. And because they had TV there, Whitmer says they always generally drew pretty big houses there at HWA. So from that's why Gabe kind of always booked the Dayton market as kind of like BJ Whitmer's home market, and why the feud ends here.
Also, ROH never ran Cincinnati, so
Yeah. So Whitmer at this point then says, "This is a part I found really interesting." This is a good tip for any wrestlers that are listening. If any wrestlers are listening, Whitmer says, "Ring of Honor shot him a price to work the barbed wire match," and so he doesn't say what the price is. I'm assuming the way he phrased it, it's you're getting the offer is more than your usual rate because they know you're going to be putting yourself through a lot of stuff. So BJ says his mindset was, he says, "I didn't tell Ring of Honor this at first, but he said whatever Homicide got paid for his barbed wire match in Ring of Honor with Steve Corino, that's what I want to get paid to do this." So he says, "What I did is I called up I told Ring of Honor when they said, 'Do you want to do this match?' I said, 'I'll think about it.' He goes, I turn around, I call Homicide, and I go, I understand if you don't want to tell me, but how much did you get paid for this, for when you did this?" Homicide tells him, again, I wish I was curious. I was like, come on, tell us how much it was, but doesn't tell. So BJ calls back, and then he says, "Okay, I want to get paid what Homicide got paid." He says, Gabe says, "I have to ask, Carrie," but BJ's saying I think it's only fair I get paid what Homicide gets paid because this is going to be the drawing match of the show, and it's a brutal match. So Gabe says, "I'll ask Carrie." BJ says Gabe comes back 5 minutes later and says, "Yeah." Carrie says, "Yeah, he'll pay that rate," and says the match is on. Then BJ notes that he says he calls the building they worked in a blistering inferno, was the words BJ used to describe this building. Like I said earlier, he said it was close to 100 degrees outside, 100 to 110 inside the building by his estimation. Didn't have air conditioning. Whitmer calls it one of his favorite matches of his career and says Necro said the same. And BJ notes, that's a guy who's had countless hardcore matches saying that, so he's really happy that Necro liked it that much. He says he and Necro would talk about the match later in hotel bars, and Necro told him at one point, he says, "I always took pride in that I'm able to outbump my opponent on any given night," but he says, "On that night, you outbumped me. I couldn't keep up with you," he said. And then
I got to agree.
Yeah, and then let me see if I can find. I put a different note somewhere else. So another thing I think we should get into that is really interesting about this match is something that we kind of forget. Because it's been so many shows since then, but BJ's ankle was still all fucked up from breaking it in the WrestleMania weekend show with Jimmy Jacobs, where they slipped off the turnbuckle, which on this shoot BJ goes into depth on that. And so BJ talks like, he just kept working at that point. And he also, by the way, I should slip this in there. He tells a funny little anecdote where in that match where, he's asking Jimmy, "Are you okay?" And Jimmy's like, "I'm okay," but it's obvious BJ's ankle screwed up. And Jimmy keeps telling him outside the ring during that match, like, you're gonna cover me as soon as we get in the ring, and I'm just gonna lay there and take the fall. Like, we're not gonna do it the rest of our match. And BJ has to keep telling him over and over again, like, it almost gets to an argument on the floor, like, you're gonna kick out, you're gonna kick out. And then he keeps telling him, "You're gonna kick out." He throws him in the ring, he covers him without telling him again to kick out, but he's emphatically telling him, "You better kick out." And then Jimmy kicks out, and how big the pop was. He was proud of that. But so anyway, his ankle was still screwed up for all these shows since then. His ankle was screwed up, and he says so. He finally, he says he went to a specialist and got an MRI like 2 weeks before Cage of Death, the Cage of Death match of the last show. And the doctor calls back and is like, "You need surgery. Not just you need surgery, but like you need surgery immediately. Like, can we get you in next week?" And BJ tells the doctor in classic wrestler fashion, like, I can't do, I've got all these shows booked. I can't do this. I'll have to do it later. And so then he calls Gabe and he tells Gabe, like, "Look, I'm going to need some time off. I'm going to need like 10 to 12 weeks. Looking at like Cage match, I think BJ only ended up taking like 8 weeks off or something. But, he tells Gabe, and Gabe's like, "Well, are you going to be able to do this stuff?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm going to be able to do these dates." He says, like, "Don't worry. I'm going to do all the things I've agreed to, but after that, I'm going to need some time off." And
so when does BJ take his time off?
He does this show, the show the day later, and then he does 3 more double shots. He does the next double shot, he does the UK double shot, and then there's one more double shot, and then he takes 2 months off and comes back before the end of the year. So,
and honestly, this was the only one where he really, really, really needed to be there. I feel like Gabe could have cut him some slack after this show.
I imagine he probably wanted to work the UK shows because that was a fun trip. But so this was, I thought, the really interesting part. BJ says he was really surprised and impressed by this. He says, I could say this for a later show, but might as well. This is the BJ show. This is the BJ show. So
you wish.
How do you know it's not the BJ show? But man, you don't know what's on
that
table.
I wish this was a video podcast now.
Oh God. So anyway, there's a good story here. BJ was shocked by this, not what's happening to me, but he was he says this never happens on the indie level, but he was giving credit to Ring of Honor here. He was saying, so I get the surgery and I have to miss 3 double shots. I have to miss a double shot on the East Coast and then 2 Midwest double shots. And he said, Gabe calls me and says, we can't pay you your full rate, but for the East Coast double shot, you're not even going to show up. We're going to pay you 75% of your rate each of the nights. We're going to pay you as if 3/4 of your money for each of those shows. And then on top of that, while you're recovering the 2 Midwest double shots, we're going to pay you 100% of your rate. You can come down here, cut a promo or whatever, but we're going to pay you that. And he says, so for those 6 shows, he got paid most of what he would have been paid. And he was just, he's like trying to emphasize in the shoot, like guys do not, on the indie level, you do not get paid for shows you don't work. So the fact that they paid me, and it was implied that was partly probably because he had gone such the extra mile, working so many shows, doing matches, crazy matches like this in the CZW feud. Like the fact that he was impressed, and he was pointing out that I had medical insurance at this time, so I didn't need them to cover my surgeries or stuff. But he said at this point in my career, this was a time where I only had wrestling. So like being out for 2 months, the fact that they were paying me for anything, that helps a lot. In fact, if you look, I think at the time we record this, Tony Deppen just pointed out that he had just broken his arm. He's going to be out for a couple months with surgery, having to get a plate put in it. And he was talking about how stressed he is. When you're an indie wrestler, you don't have guaranteed money. It's a huge deal if you're trying to make a living just off indie wrestling to get an injury, because you're screwed. No one's going to give you good money. But in this case, apparently they helped him out a bit.
That's honestly really remarkable. Like I think even as a fan, we know like that's not something that's done.
And I'll say like BJ later, like this interview was conducted in 2012, and later like BJ is not afraid to like criticize Gabe Sapolsky or other people. So like this isn't him just sucking up to somebody or anything. This is him out just saying credit where credit is due. Like they did something that nobody does on the indie level for me. So after the match, and I do want to mention this because you're talking about the BJ shoot interview.
This is one of the things that makes me feel like good about us doing our podcast, in the sense of like BJ Whitmer is not a guy that gets super celebrated like outside of certain circles. He's not someone that gets talked about that much. He's not someone that's probably going to be in like like the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame or anything like that, or even get the the big worldwide outpouring late hopefully many years from now when he passes on, like the way like let's say a Jay Briscoe did, because he's just not as famous or well known. But like for this era, he had some incredible moments. He gave so much of himself. He had some genuinely like great matches based on performances he gave, and he doesn't always get the credit. So I'm glad that we can sort of do this podcast to help keep the legacy of the stuff that guys like him contributed during this era alive, when it wasn't seen by all that many people. At least we can keep a record of the fact, like this guy really sacrificed a lot and went above and beyond the call of duty, and some of the stuff that he produced was really fucking good. And this won't be the last one of these big brawls that BJ was in that to me is like one of the legendary matches of ROH. So hats off to BJ Whitmer, and I'm glad that we could give him some love on this podcast many years later.
Yeah. I completely agree. And watching the shoot interview, like he comes off as you can't really judge a guy based on like a very random appearance on a shoot interview, but like he came off as very like well spoken and gregarious and kind of just a fairly cool guy. And it was one of those things where he's talking about how like during a lot of his career he had to work at GNC, and all the injuries he suffered and stuff like that, like realizing that now I kind of got a similar vibe from you, that feeling good about like, oh, we can kind of at least give a little spotlight, realizing as I was watching the shoot that like, oh, he's a producer in AEW now, like he's making a full-time living presumably off of wrestling. Like,
no, it's true.
watching,
I don't even
like,
mean it like that, but
good.
like he still is not somebody that like most fans would know
No.
or his body of work. And, you know, unless you were like watching ROH, and you know, he got a lot of shit in that era. Like there were a lot of people that, you know, didn't like him or, you know, criticized him. So
at the very end of the shoot is him being like, I know people say I don't have charisma. He just kind of goes, I'm fucking great. Like the very end of the shoot is basically him like flipping off the like people that are against him. Like,
that's,
just,
you know what,
like he's aware of how he's seen.
But good for him that, you know, that he has that confidence and stuff. Cause, you know, yeah, I mean, he wasn't the world's most charismatic wrestler, and I could see critiques of him, but you can't deny the effort. I mean, in the sense that Tommy Dreamer got that legacy in ECW of, you know, maybe not being the world's greatest worker, but, you know, he clearly like was a heart and soul of the company and gave a lot of his body and, you know, really damaged his body at a young age. And it's just like, well, BJ during this year did a lot of the same things. So, you know, good for BJ Whitmer, and respect to BJ Whitmer.
Like later on when he's talking about some criticisms he has, the Sapolsky's like they're the end of his first Ring of Honor run, you know, he points out like, I'm a guy who did everything that was asked him and stuff like that. And like when you watch this year, what we've been watching, like, yeah, you really feel like this is a guy who doesn't seem like he said no to much, you know, like who else went this far against the CZW guys? And you just gave the perfect comparison, Tommy Dreamer, because I was going to ask you, I think when I was really sat down to think about this, I'm sure there are matches I'm missing, but I think in some ways this night, even though it's not well remembered by a lot of people, is the high point of BJ Whitmer's career. Because think about it, how many other times can you say all these things aligned for him, in the sense of BJ Whitmer is, you know, Ring of Honor is the biggest company he was in. So this is where he tops out. So he's in the main event of a Ring of Honor show. That didn't happen very often. More than that, it's not a tag or a multi-man. It's a singles match. He's the babyface in the singles match. It's the draw of the show, you could argue. It's I would argue the best match of the show. He wins the match, and the crowd, he's very over in the match. Like, when else did all those stars align? Like, in some ways, I would argue, I mean, he talks about this as a career highlight. I would think, just looking over his career, in some ways, this is like the night of his career. He's the closest to being like a real feels like a big star. Like this is the one night where it's all about him.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, you know, as far as like the greatest match of his ROH career, to me, and, you know, we'll see if it holds up, that's still the cage match against Jimmy Jacobs. And we'll see how that compares to this when we get to it, however many months or years from now it is. Yeah. But those are the two that stand out as far as like the shining moments of BJ Whitmer.
Yeah, and the Jacob stuff is remembered more, but so I would agree, and I would agree that's better in some ways. But also, this is the one time he doesn't have like the cage match. That's on one of those stacked WrestleMania weekend shows. This is the one time he's not really sharing the spotlight with anybody. This is the night he's the main event. It's all for him. Exactly. And the Tommy Dreamer thing, like, Gabe really did book him like Tommy Dreamer in this run, and it did work. It's just it didn't sustain, you know. Like,
this can't sustain. It would have killed him, you know, if they kept this up for, you know, where this was just what they did with BJ Whitmer forever, you know.
But in terms of they like Gabe took a thing right out of his mentor's playbook where here's this guy who's a hard worker who's kind of stuck in the mid card, who's not super over with our crowd. So we're going to kind of have him wear like the banner holder for our company against people that are seeking to like tear it down. We're going to have him just suffer for the fans over and over again and just take an ungodly amount of abuse. And it got Tommy Dreamer over. And it got Whitmer on this night. I would say it worked for by this night. You would just ask me, well, I would say, well, God damn, it worked for Whitmer too. But yeah, like you said, he can't stay with that, and it doesn't. Stuff like the Hangman 3, it doesn't keep the momentum going. The other guy I would compare him to is Sean Spears. I feel like and I don't mean this in a negative, but the way some people talk about him, like he's a good hand. He is missing something that separates good mid-card wrestlers from like the eye-catching, this is my favorite wrestler level wrestlers in the main events. But he's always a really hard worker. He's dependable, you know, he's a good hand, and that sometimes comes off as a negative. And I'm sure if you're on the indie level, being a good hand is not something you want to be, because at least if you're a good hand on the WWE level, you can make a good living. You can't really make a great living being a good hand on the indie level. But as far as talent, I don't think there's a shame in that. And I guess the last thing I would say is I'll give like kind of Whitmer the last word on his career here, because there was one other bit from the shoot interview where the way he framed it I didn't think of, but it makes complete sense as soon as I heard it. So BJ basically says, what I thrive on is storylines I could really sink my teeth into that build up to a big blow off match where I can work my ass off and bleed. And he goes, the CZW feud was like that. The Prophecy Second City Saints feud was like that. And the Jimmy Jacobs feud was like that. He goes, those kind of feuds that end with the big bloody final match is what I grew up on. He goes, those are where I'm like at my best. And like when he framed it like that, I was like, yeah, like that's all his career highlights to me. Like those are the things I think of, is these feuds that end with just one gigantic gimmick match where you're just taking ungodly punishment and working your butt off. Like he really did. That's where he was at his best. And unfortunately he doesn't get a ton of those, but he gets a few of those. But, so after the match, the crowd chants, "That was awesome." And BJ, as Homicide cuts more of Whitmer's hair off, free of the barbs with a pair of scissors. Whitmer then drops to his knees, salutes the crowd, who chants, "Thank you, Whitmer." BJ bows to each side of the ring. He climbs the ladders. The entire crowd's on their feet, giving him a standing ovation, chanting for him. And we get a fairly rare for Ring of Honor end of show with no backstage promos. It just ends with him walking to the back. And again, I thought this was, like similar to you, I felt like this is nice that he's getting that victory lap, but I'm glad, hopefully, maybe our review of this gives a few people a reason to revisit it or think about him, because before I watched this match and did this research, I was kind of taking this match for granted too. I kind of forgot about it, and like it's a match that made me realize like why I wanted to focus so much on him here. It was like he deserves to have his day in the sun. This is his day in the sun, I would say. One of them. But
yep. On that wonderful summer night that we love so much. It was in a sunny summer hot day. So quite the day in the sun.
And so that brings us to the end of the show. If you want to give us any feedback, have any notes about a future show, anything like that, ThROHtheyears@gmail.com, THROH. Twitter @TrevorDame is me, @MayorMGF is Matt.
And I do just want to say, just because I didn't really totally give my total summation on this show.
I forgot that. Yeah.
It's a B show, but I don't think it really feels like a B show because that main event was such a big spectacle. And like, I do think it's incredibly solid. And if it wasn't for the main event, I would say like it's solid but unmemorable. But the main event is super fucking memorable. So I think, boring as it is for us to say, another damn good ROH DVD.
Yeah, I agree. It does feel very much like a B show in some ways, but in some ways it doesn't. Like, there are stakes on this show between the main event being a big blow-off, like a crazy gimmick match you won't see hardly ever else in Ring of Honor's history, to this being the show that Seidel finally gets to beat Daniels, to even the four-way actually setting up a future title match when four-ways often don't even do that. Like, yeah. Even if some of the matches are a little bit like the Colt Nigel match and the Briscoes, Roddy and Jack Evans match aren't as good as you would hope they would be, and there is a bit of a B show vibe at some points. It's a good B show with like a couple special, like one real special, unique moment things up top.
Considering how big the last show was, they could have done much less on this show and gotten away with it. So good for them for putting out another exciting event.
And that brings us, in fact, to the next show we'll be coming. It's the second half of this double shot, and that is a show entitled Generation Now, back in Cleveland. That's a show where we'll get the Nigel McGuinness, Bryan Danielson, their second match in Ring of Honor. We'll get Christian Cage's second and final match in Ring of Honor against Christopher Daniels. And we'll get the match that kind of is the billing for the show, Generation Now. We'll get the final Generation Next 8-man tag where they kind of bookend their Ring of Honor career as a stable with another 8-man tag against the rising stars of Ring of Honor. Only one of them that actually kind of keeps a spot in Ring of Honor long term. But that should be fun. There's going to be a lot to talk about there. So we'll catch you then. Until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.